Is America entering a civil war? Many I talk to believe it is. And so we need to actually sit down and have conversations with people we disagree with. On my channel, I oftentimes criticize things like the LGBTQ agenda, the alphabet people, everything under the sun when it comes to socialism, communism, Marxism, and all that. But I oftentimes am asked, do you actually ever talk to anybody who thinks differently than you? Yes, I do. And now we're going to put it on record here on Speechless. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Speechless on Cities 92.9 and on YouTube. And that's where you guys are watching right now. Thank you so much. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment what you think, and share it with your friends, all that fun stuff. But let's get right on into it. I'm going to introduce my guest today, Zac Gittrich. Zac Gittrich, you are a leftist, a socialist, an alphabet person, and more. Introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, ho. This is Zac Gittrich of Agitation Rising, your source for local leftist independent journalism in Central Illinois and beyond. And I am here to engage in alphabet wars with you.
Alphabet wars, absolutely.
Among other things that we will eventually discuss. But that's the main thing that we're starting with.
Well, and your gay agenda is going to turn everyone who watches this today gay. It's going to be the Bud Light of YouTube. And that's the whole point. You can start off right with your shirt there. Yes. I mean, make sure the camera sees it well. If you're reading this, you're queer. So everybody, Pride Month is next July. Make sure you are out. It is July, right? That is okay. July. Make sure you're out and you have your rainbows on. You put your dildos on and you wave them in everybody's faces, especially the children, because that's what it is to me. But we're going to talk about all of that under the sun in this long special, guys. So the whole point of this is that we can try to better understand and actually not necessarily change minds, but show that a civil conversation can happen between two people that are at the surface level diametrically opposed. But I'm sure we can find some common ground in some things. So let's talk about, for a lot of it, we're going to talk about LGBTQ, but especially the gender ideology. And that's where I want to start off with, is the gender ideology. The common question that's often asked is, what is a woman? I have my answer to you. What is a woman?
What is a woman? I've heard this is hard, so I'm going to go slow. Okay. So a woman is an adult human, right? Am I right so far?
I would say that a woman would be an adult human.
Okay, good. I'm glad we got this. So it's an adult human with more female sex characteristics than male sex characteristics and or a female embodiment.
Okay.
Did I get it right?
More sex characteristics that are female.
Yes.
And a female embodiment.
Yes.
Female embodiment. Help explain that to me and my audience.
Yeah. So an embodiment, it's a term that's used in philosophy to basically describe the way that your body fits into space and time and interacts with the world around it and makes sense with the world. And so it kind of tries to get rid of this nature nurture divide, because in a lot of ways that ends up being a false dichotomy. So you and I, a male embodiment is an embodiment that we see typical of people with mainly male sex characteristics. And typically in our society, people with mainly male sex characteristics, their embodiment attaches to typically masculine gender characteristics. But that's contingent. It's not inherently necessary. And there are plenty of situations that we find where that's not the case. And especially with gender, like sex, the way that sex is organized is fairly a common pattern throughout the planet. But the kind of gender traits and gender characteristics that exist are, vastly different all across the planet, even now at our current time. And so that is does that give you kind of a brief understanding of what embodiment means?
Better understanding. You bring up the term sex. Is there a difference between sex and gender?
Yes.
What is it? So, I don't really believe there is.
I've noticed. So like sex is the way that organisms organize certain traits in order to reproduce the species. Sex is not made up of any one specific traits. It's made up of a multitude of traits, and including genetic sex, chromosomal sex, hormonal sex, gonadal sex, germ cells, gametes, genitalia, and then you also have a number of secondary sex characteristics. And in order to actually reproduce the species, you can't rely on any one specific. They all basically have to be working together. It's a constellation. The stars have to align. And if they don't, if one of those characteristics doesn't exist sufficiently, then you can't reproduce the species in that sense. But just if something horrible were to happen to me and like I were to get castrated, I wouldn't cease being a male because I still have all these other male traits. So my view is not that there's like some essentialist quality that we have, like there's this essential notion of maleness that we all have. It's just that the reason you and I are males is because we pretty much almost all of our sex, especially all of our primary sex traits, are male. And even if we lose one of them, the overwhelming majority of the rest of our traits are still male. And so that's what would make us male.
Okay, so that's sex.
Yes, that's biological.
Yeah,
sex.
and that makes sense to me. You put the puzzle pieces together, and it makes the full picture.
Yes,
and they're all biological. It's all natural.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there are people that will argue that there's certain levels of social construction involved in biological sex, but for the purposes of this argument, yes.
Okay. What is gender?
So gender is the way that societies organize sexed bodies. So it's obviously they're related. And it's basically you have what roles, what characteristics, what expressions, what ways of moving about, what things you're allowed to do that society says certain sex bodies are allowed to do and certain sex bodies are allowed to not do. And the reason that we say that it's socially constructed is because we see completely different forms of expressions and different roles all over the planet, all over different times. So, and again, most of the time, the majority of the time, female bodies they're organized in a way to where their embodiment tends to attach itself to more feminine characteristics and vice versa for males and masculine. But we find all sorts of instances where that's not the case. And in the secular West, we've really opened up a lot of what we consider to be masculine activities and what we consider to be feminine activities and what we allow boys and men and girls and women to do, compared to if we were to go to like really conservative countries like in the Middle East, where they still have very, very rigid understandings of what men and women are allowed to do. And I personally think it's a good thing that we've opened it up and that we've detached a lot of these qualities, or in some cases we've degendered certain things, we've ungendered them. And the idea that
would you be able to describe it as the destruction of gender?
There has definitely been a lot of that, and that was a lot of what second wave feminism was attempting to do, because throughout most of human history, things like, men are more intelligent, women are more emotional, men, they are transcendent, women are immanent, and what they're the lack of men, women are more stupid. All of these things were considered to be hard biological facts. They were considered to be necessary characteristics of being a woman or being a man. And especially when second wave feminism came out, and this had already been going on for about 100 years, there was this, it's like, no, that's ridiculous. Women can be leaders too. Women can do all sorts of stuff that men can do. And so it was really important to detach these away. But we still find it useful in society to have some of these expressions. And for whatever reason, some of us enjoy these in ways that don't always make that are contingent, that are in some cases arbitrary to others. And so that's the difference basically between sex and gender. Sex is the biological traits that we use to reproduce the species, and whether you're fertile or not. I mean, so to me there is a what I would call a spectral binary between the two sexes. You have, because it's different organizations. We have a pattern of male organizational traits and female organizational traits. And depending on how many traits you have is where you fall in line with that spectrum. But then you can also have another binary spectrum that gets put on, whether it's fertile and infertile. So depending on your organizational traits, you may be more fertile than other people, depending on their organizational traits. And so I would call it a binary spectrum when it comes to biological sex. Gender is something entirely different, whether it's a spectrum or a binary and stuff like that. So
put it in gender, because I understand where you're coming with sex. Sex makes sense to me in your definitions. It's natural, biological. It's a puzzle. It's a puzzle where you can have some of the pieces missing, but the picture is still there. That makes sense to me. In your simplest terms, gender. I feel you covered it a little bit. Socially constructed.
What do you think a social construct means? Let me just ask you that.
A social construct would be something that's not natural. Well, not inherently natural in terms.
It's naturally occurring.
Naturally occurring, but it's not like you were. It was born to happen necessarily. It was something that the people of society made up in simplest terms.
Okay, but do you assume that social constructs aren't real?
Depends on what the social construct.
Well, money is a social construct. Would you agree that money is a social construct?
Money is a social construct.
Okay,
and it's real.
Yeah, it's real.
Money is
exactly.
real. The value in it is what we place on it.
Yeah, and that's a real value.
Yeah.
So social constructs are real things. It's not like they're just these like fictions that we're pretending.
Okay.
So
I much more agree. I kind of actually agree with that. And that's why, and there can be a sense of naturality to the entire idea of a social construct. If we take gender as an example of it, if we consider ideas like, oh, well, it's been a quote unquote social construct of gender for a lot of our life that women are homemakers, women take care of the children, which you would say just to make sure you agree is a part of the idea of gender. And
that is one way that societies have organized female bodies.
Yep. And biologically, that would also make sense considering the fact that women naturally have tended to be more caring, empathetic, and everything along those lines than men have ever been. So it would make more sense generally based on that natural inherent. By and large, I speak by and large because we teach everybody that everybody has 10 fingers, 10 toes. You don't teach that. Then you talk about the exceptions to the rule, but it's not the rule in and of itself.
Yeah, but what do you think that means, exception to the rule? Like, do you think the exception to the rule invalidates the exception?
What do you mean?
Okay, so I mean, in this case, we're not so much talking about a rule, but a pattern.
Yeah.
The exception to the pattern shows that a pattern exists, but the exception also still exists. Otherwise, it wouldn't reveal that there's a pattern.
The exception still exists, but when you have a conversation about the overall whole, you can't use the exception or the small 1% or 0.5%, whatever it is, the minuscule portion to invalidate the other 99.9%.
Well, you can if you believe that the 99.9% is a necessary condition, and necessary in the same way that 2 + 2 always equals 4.
I think we're getting very meta in a lot of this. Let's bring it back into, so can a man become a woman? I want to try to deal in simple terms because so that everybody can understand the conversation we're having.
Yes.
Can a man become a woman?
Yes, and a male can become a female. Like, I also believe you can change your biological sex as well.
How can you change your biological sex?
Because you can change the sex traits that make up your biological sex. You can't change all of them, but you can change a lot of them.
I heavily disagree.
Okay.
You can present, you can do everything you can to look and cosplay as the other gender, the other sex, but you can never fully become a woman.
Can you
become a male?
Can you remove sex traits?
Like, can I chop my dick off?
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
So you have one less trait. So your biological sex just changed. You're still male because you still have mostly male sex traits, but the organization has changed.
But that doesn't mean I've changed my sex.
Yeah, you're still male, but because you have mostly male sex traits. But say you start taking female hormone levels. And like, just to be clear, we all have testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone in our bodies, whether you're female, male, intersex, or whatever. The actual difference is the amount of them. So if you started taking female levels of hormones, even though you have an XY karyotype, your body would still respond to them in the same way that somebody with an XX karyotype. That's why people that start taking female hormone levels start to develop breasts. Their body structure can sometimes shift and stuff like that. So like, yes, you can change. Like, even you and I, our sex traits have already naturally changed. Like, the idea that sex is immutable is just fundamentally absurd, because the basic concept of something being biological is that it can change. That's like the essential feature of something being biological, is that it can change on its own.
But I feel like we're talking about two different things here, because you're starting and saying that you can change your sex, that you can change it, but you're saying that ways in which you would do that is by chopping off my dick, or
you would change the morphology of your genitalia,
starting to take hormones, both of which would not be natural or naturally biological.
But your body would still respond naturally to them.
But then you go on to say that well, it's the entire idea of nature and biology that your body will change. Well, yeah, you're right. We go through puberty, but at the end of the day, going through puberty means that I went from a young male to an older male. In no way, and while it changed some of my sex traits,
did occur.
It changed some of my sex traits. Traits, and it in no way changed my sex.
Yeah, because you still have most of those same traits. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so
yeah, but your organization changed. Like you gained more traits from going through puberty, unless you were able to inseminate at birth. Were you like a little Rizzler? Did you have that newborn Riz?
No, I was not.
Okay, well, I'm just making sure. Props to you if you got that, man.
That is not who I was. It's not.
But again, like you actually gained more sex traits when you went through puberty. So again, like you can. I mean, even when we,
there's a process of human development that allows for many of your sex traits to become more predominant past puberty. I'll agree with you there. And so, yes, your sex traits change naturally, but it in no way changes your biological sex. And you have said that you can change your biological sex.
Yeah.
I don't believe that. I don't understand how that works.
I mean, you may be like, you're still saying it's the same label, which I completely agree. Mm-hmm. It's the same label, but it's a specific organization has changed. You've gained more traits or you gain less traits. And the thing that puts you in the pattern is just simply what type of traits that you have. So if you continue to get more male traits, you stay within the male pattern. But if you start changing those so that you start gaining female traits, then you move into a different pattern. I mean, we already have intersex people that have, and there's different ways of defining what it means to be intersex, but my definition is simply that you have incongruent sex traits. So you may have XY chromosomes, but because you have because of some genetic defect or genetic difference, your body doesn't respond to testosterone. So you end up developing a completely female karyotype. And some people with androgen insensitivity syndrome also end up being able to get pregnant, and they have perfectly healthy babies. So if it's necessarily the case that only people with XX can give birth, then all I have to do is find one example to show that it's not necessary, that it's contingent. I mean, I'm not disagreeing that, like, in the high 90 cases, these are the patterns that you find, but I'm disagreeing that it's 100% natural or necessary, or excuse me, I'm disagreeing that it's 100% essential or necessary that it's the case. And, if you are sterile, you get procedures done that would give you more, if you're a female and you're sterile, there are certain procedures that you could get done to give you more female sex characteristics so that you could become fertile, and vice versa for males.
Okay. We're going, I feel like a lot of what you do when you talk, and this is just not necessarily even criticism, is you'll expand things out to a point where I'm not even following exactly where we are anymore. I want to stay onto.
Well, look, there's a reason why biology textbooks are thousands of pages of long and not 5 pages of long, because it's one of the most complicated things in the known universe. Like,
I really do. But the problem, here's where I think a lot of times leftists, progressives, I think they get it wrong, is that there are ways to, yes, you're right. You can have a 5,000 page biology textbook, but you can have a conversation about it that doesn't necessarily need to be 5,000 pages long. And you can make it to where it's relatively simple. You can. I think you can make the majority of concepts into a relatively simple conversation.
Yeah, you can abstract and generalize. It's something that is essentially, like, humans are really good at doing it. Humans are really good at finding patterns. I'm not denying that patterns exist. I'm just trying to get into the minutia of the patterns. Now, in most of the conversations, is it necessary that you get into it? No, but in this specific one, I think it is. I think it's absolutely relevant. I think when someone says, something like biological sex is immutable, I mean, that's just clearly false, regardless of whether you even include trans people, because again, as I've said, from birth throughout the life, your the organization of your sex traits is constantly changing. And it's not even in one direction towards more fertility, because as you get older, you get less fertile. So the idea that biological sex does not change it's just fundamentally absurd. It's fundamentally unscientific.
The biological sex does
not.
not.
The label that we give it, the word that we give to a specific set of patterns does not change. That is correct. But the biological sex, the sex traits themselves, which are what determine the biological sex, absolutely change.
But again, the biological sex does not change. The traits can, but the sex itself does not.
I mean, you could say it changes and it becomes more advanced, or it becomes less advanced. But again, that's a change.
But then that's the traits. We're talking about the traits. The sex itself did not.
The sex is only constituted based off of the traits.
Is still there. The puzzle still shows a comparable picture relative. And yes, maybe it faded a little bit with time, but the picture is still there.
Yeah, it's still false.
And you can't change it from being a guy to a girl in a dress.
I mean, you can change your sex traits.
Well, you can change. You can change your sex traits, but your sex did not change.
Well, of course it did.
No, it didn't. No, it didn't. See, here's because a male cannot become a female.
Not with that attitude.
You're right.
You gotta have a better attitude than that, man.
No, a male cannot become a female. A female cannot become a male. It does not matter how many hormones you take, how many dresses you wear.
Well, a dress isn't a biological sex trait.
Well, it's
it's not a biological sex. Like, there's nothing inherent in like chromosomes that says, I must wear a dress.
No,
it's like I watch shows where like men's are wearing kilts. Those are essentially like kilts are essentially dresses, man.
What I'm trying to say is that it does not matter how many hormones you take. If you cut off your genitals, if you add some fake ones, some prosthetics, anything like that. You cannot change from being a biological male to being a biological female.
Yes, you can.
How though? How?
I've explained that because the only way that sex exists is through all of the different traits you have, and you can change those. You can't change all of them, and it's not easy to change your sex traits, but you can change them. And
but again, you're only changing some of the traits, not all of the traits. Some of the traits,
and so
there is zero way to change all of the traits.
Yeah, no, I at least as of we have now, I completely agree. And so, if you're a trans male, I mean, I think it's perfectly fine just saying that you're an intersex male at that point. And I don't know if I've brought up intersex so far, but intersex just means you have incongruent sex traits. I mean, in my definition, it means you have incongruent sex traits that we do not normally find.
Yeah, there's people that are born with both sets of genitalia. They have chromosomes that don't necessarily match.
There are people that are born with both XX, XY chromosomes in different cells.
Yeah, we're talking about like 1%, if not less, of the population.
It's between 0.02% and 1.7%, depending on how you define intersex. And the way I define it would be closer to 1.7.
I'm willing to bet if I knew exactly the definitions, mine would probably be closer to the 0.2%.
Well, again, because the 0.0. Well, 0.2 is higher than
0.02.
Yeah. So like 0.02, it's based on whether you have like abnormal genitalia. Me, like I said, I base it off of incongruent sex traits in general. So you could have one karyotype, you could have a male karyotype, and all the rest of your traits end up being female.
Wouldn't that essentially mean that like you could have a dick, but you were born with the genetic predisposition to grow maybe slightly larger chest?
Yeah, there are. I mean, and having tits, having breasts is a secondary female sex characteristic.
But I mean, like, it could also just present itself as being a larger guy.
It could also present itself. I mean, there are some men that are not going to
be like, you're not going to.
But there are some men that are able to lactate. Like, that is a real thing that happens.
Yeah.
There's women that are able to grow facial. There's actually a lot of women that are able to grow facial hair. I mean, there are women that can go bald. These are all secondary sex traits. And so, yeah, I mean, they move around. They're not 100%.
But by your definition, all of those would be included in the intersex.
No, intersex to me is only incongruent primary sex traits. Okay. I wouldn't include secondary sex characteristics. Okay. And again, secondary sex characteristics, we only even call them sex characteristics is because they occur around puberty, even though they don't have any direct relation to reproduction proper.
Okay.
So
okay. So there's a question that because we made I'll let everybody know out there. We made like a short notes page as a general guideline. And we have a question here. Do trans people actually exist? We've kind of hovered around the issue of trans. We've been talking a lot more about biological sex. Do trans people actually exist? I'm pretty sure this one was much more aimed towards myself. Yes, there are people out there that do believe that they're a different gender than they really are. Trans people do exist. However,
all right, we ended. We figured it out. We're done. Won the alphabet wars.
I always get this, but I get this question all the time, or not even necessarily the question. I get this accusation at me all the time. It's, you're denying people's existence. Oh, no. If a person comes up to me and it's obviously like I did a video recently on this biological male that goes into restaurants and just talks about how, or it just complains that he gets misgendered by all of the wait staff. No, if that person came up to me, I would absolutely know they exist. I wouldn't, but I could touch them. I could feel them, all that. They do exist, but he is in a state of delusion. He is in a state of delusion. He is not a woman. He has been put through a lot in his life that has led him down a road to be significantly mentally ill.
I mean, I think the reason some people might make that accusation is not because necessarily you have said trans people not exist, but what I will very nicely term the gender critical movement. What I will very nicely term the gender critical movement. There are many people like Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles that absolutely deny that trans people do exist in any form, but their argument will be very much the same. Keep going.
Their argument will be very much the same for like, so Matt Walsh's and the Michael Knowles will be very, do you have a continuing thought on that?
Yeah. I mean, they will say it's a delusion. I don't believe it is. I mean, I believe that gender dysphoria, which many trans people have, and the way that kind of the medical community has defined it is that gender dysphoria itself is the mental illness, but the treatment of it and transitioning is not itself the mental illness. And so that's specifically different. And, you know, you can go on and on about...
You could start with gender dysphoria. You could also, gender dysphoria has been reclassified by the DSM as no longer a mental illness.
No, gender dysphoria is.
It's transgenderism.
Having gender identity disorder, which means that you are transgender, has no longer been classified as a mental illness. But having extreme gender dysphoria is a mental illness. Gotcha. Because it disrupts your ability to function normally in society. And that's typically how we define mental illnesses, is whether you're able to fully function in society or not.
Well, how do you... I could go on a whole tangent about how do you define what is considered fully functional in society, because I would argue a significant portion of my generation is not fully functional in society.
I can't speak for all you Zoomers. I don't have anything wrong with Zoomers. I'm not like one of those guys that's like, oh, these damn Zoomers and their Tide Pods and their rap music and their AIDS. I'm not one of those guys. All that. It's just, I'm not one of those guys.
We have people crying about the fact that they have to work a 9 to 5, and I'm just like, okay, calm down, honey.
Yeah. So like, I'll give you an example. I mean, I knew a trans guy. And when I met him, he was homeless. He was in with like people that frequently abused him and took advantage of him. He didn't have custody of his kids because he had kids prior to realizing he was trans. And then I met him and we started getting him on a regular hormone regime. He was on mental health meds. He got top surgery. He realized he didn't need to take his mental health meds anymore because he got rid of like that level of dysphoria. And he's continued to progress. And now he has a long-term partner. He has custody of all of his kids. He has a long-term job. He owns his own house. So clearly he went from being disordered to his life now being very well ordered, having pretty much the normal life. I mean, he's living his best life as far as I'm concerned. He's living a better life than I am, and I don't have gender dysphoria. So clearly going through that process made his life significantly better.
Okay. And one thing I want to bring up though is in terms of the idea of the mental illness because I want to talk about the idea of whether or not transitioning and everything like that, positive, negative effects, everything like that, as well as the argument between adults and children. But I want to start off with this thought I've had for quite a while. There's another mental illness out there that is called psychosis. And psychosis in simplest terms is the belief in something that is not. That's another way that I would classify any level of transgenderism, gender dysphoria, anything like that, because you are believing that you are something that you are not. And even from what I understand from the conversation we had earlier, if there is somebody who is fully presenting as male and it was born a male and has all the sex traits as a male, and they believe they are a woman, wouldn't that be a classification of psychosis, or at least in some level of a delusion? Because you by your own accord, in the fact that to change your sex, you have to change your sex traits. So somebody who has all the sex traits of a male, they believe that they are a woman. Wouldn't that be a mental illness?
Yeah. So there's different way that trans theories tend to try and answer this question. People, I don't want to say this is exclusive to trans medicalists, but people that are more of the exclusionary type of trans would say that the brain itself has sex, is a sexed organ. And so a lot of them will say, well, you know, if I were a trans man, they would say, I was born in a female body and I have mainly female sex characteristics. But I have, based on the phenotype, I have a male brain. And so that's where something like dysphoria happens. And so then it comes down to, I mean, how do you treat that? How do you fix that? Now, I'm a little skeptical of like brain sex, whether there even are like dimorphism in the brain as far as like morphology is concerned. The best thing that I've kind of heard is that there's more of a mosaic, in a similar way that I described earlier. There's lots of different like males tend to have more of specific types of male brain traits. Females typically have more types of female brain traits, but typically when you're born, it's a mosaic. You have a mixture of both. You may have way more of one than the other, but it's a mosaic. And the way the brain works is it only works in relation to the world and the environment that you're in. Even, you know, at my age, you know, as a dinosaur at 35, your brain is constantly rewiring itself based on the environment that it's in. So your brain is constantly changing. And so, yeah, I mean, my belief is basically you're kind of born with a certain body schema, and it's always a schema that's open. It's open to be able to be changed, and it adapts with the situation. And for people that are trans, they are born with a body schema that, for whatever reason, rejects certain sex traits that they have. And I'd go even further, reject certain types of movement, reject certain types of ways of expressing. And it's a very small minority of people, but it still exists. I mean, the evidence is clear that these people exist, and the evidence is also clear that transitioning overwhelmingly has beneficial effects for them. So,
well, I would disagree on that point. That it has overwhelming beneficial effects for them. The most comprehensive study that I understand, over 300 people over the course of almost 30 years out of Sweden, conducted from like 1973 to 2004. I just know this one. I know we had a document. This is just one I've known for quite a while.
It's the one that says 90% of trans people's suicide goes up.
It's not 90. It's that the rate of suicide for trans people does not change post-operation. It
doesn't change, or it goes up.
It's like 50 to 51. It's 50% before, 51% after.
Okay, because the one I'm familiar with, the one that's in What is a Woman, it's called Long-Term Follow-Up of Transsexual Persons Undergoing Sex Reassignment Surgery, Cohort Study in Sweden, and it's by Cecilia Dejne. I'm sorry if I'm spelling her name wrong.
That's fine.
And she has explicitly said in interviews, of course, trans medical and psychological care is efficacious. She has said multiple times that the study itself, this study I just quoted, is being completely misrepresented by people who are gender critical. So even the person who wrote the study is saying this is not what the study says.
I care about the statistics that it points out.
Yeah, but she's saying that you're misinterpreting the statistics. That's what she's saying.
I'm reading the statistics like verbatim. Like, I mean, I see like verbatim. It says that the suicide rate does not change pre to post op.
Yeah,
and then we can talk about why that would be.
The reason that.
But how am I misinterpreting that when that's what it says? Like
Well, because she's saying that you are misinterpreting the data, and the reason that
how is that a misinterpretation? That's like exactly what it says.
But the reason that it says that is not because of the specific sex reassignment, but it's more of the way that society treats those people. That's why it doesn't go up.
But how do we know that? That's where I want to. That's where
because that's what she says in the study.
But how does?
And so here's the other thing. Look, there's another study here.
So, hold on.
Let me keep going. What We Know project from Cornell University. What does the scholarly research say about the effect of gender transition on transgender well-being? And it says, we conducted a systematic review of 55 different studies and what it found is that 93% found that gender transition improves the overall well-being of transgender people, while only 7% reported mixed or null findings. We found no studies concluding that gender transition causes overall harm. And then if you look at detransition, this is regret after gender affirmation surgery, a systematic review and meta-analysis of prevalence by Bustos et al. From 2020. They went over 8,000 transgender patients who underwent any type of gender-affirming surgery, and the pooled prevalence of regret was 1%. So this is what the actual data is showing on this issue.
Okay, but what I want to talk about with all of it though is so the claim was that I'm misinterpreting it because it's because of how they're treated in society. My argument to that would be, are you mentally well if you go through all of these changes and you need my validation? And you need my validation to keep you from committing suicide.
I mean, if someone calls you like a piece of shit over and over again every single day, that's going to affect your mental health, right?
I mean, I went through high school.
If everybody's doing it,
I went through high school with that, and while it didn't have the best, I came out of it and I made what it taught me was that, wow, so many people's opinions about me do not matter. They do not matter. If you firmly believe you're a woman, why do you need and because the thing is, I'm not calling them a piece of shit, and so anybody.
No, I'm not saying that you are.
I know, and so
I'm just using that as an example.
And I understand that, and so sure, nobody should, but what I see, at least, and again, it's not necessarily statistically backed, it's anecdotal, but from what I see, what is told as mistreating transgender people is when they are obviously a he, and you call them that when they identify and pretend to be a woman. That's what's considered mistreating somebody who is transgender. And so if you need my validation of your delusion, then are you mentally well? Because here's the thing, for the most part, by and large, I'm like, if you are 19 and you get cleared by a person that is, or a medical professional, psychiatric professionals to go through a gender surgery, sure, okay.
Though, just to be clear, not all trans people medically transition. Not all trans people choose to medically transition, or they don't feel that they always need to.
Okay, so, but the study that we were discussing talked about the effects of medically transition.
Of what I would consider transsexuals. Transsexuals are people who actually medically transition, and all transsexuals are transgender. Not all transgender people are transsexuals.
Squares and rectangles, but
it's a smaller square within a rectangle. Okay, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
No, but a lot of what I'm talking about here has to do with those who do medically transition, because that's what the statistic is from. We're talking about the efficacy of transitioning, and so, or at least changing your body parts to be a better cosplayer, in my opinion. But why is it? Do you not see a problem with the idea that if somebody, because the mistreatment that is being discussed, okay, sure, if it's somebody continuously calling you a piece of shit, now I think nobody's mentally well if they're contemplating suicide, and that's outside of transgenderism, everything like that. If you're contemplating suicide, please seek help, no matter what it's for. And it's awful that anybody kills themselves for any reason, in my opinion. I mean, there's the whole euthanasia argument that we could have, but
I don't particularly want. I didn't come here to have that.
No,
argument,
I know. So. I'm just covering all my bases. But isn't there an issue when somebody needs everyone's and society's validation to prevent themselves from killing themselves. Isn't there an issue with that?
I mean, it depends on what the specific problem is that it's causing. But to act as if social factors have no influence on our mental wellness is, again, it's absurd. I think that's an utterly absurd statement. It's like,
I don't think I ever said that it doesn't, but I think that.
Well, I think you're minimizing it as if it doesn't. I mean, like I said, to me, I don't think there is a hard nature nurture divide. I don't think there is, because your brain only works in relation to the world around you and in relation to the society around you. And for some people, if you have an insistent, persistent, and consistent gender dysphoria, and it's very extreme, then yeah, those things could definitely have a significant influence on you. And it seems like the simplest thing to do is, call a person the way that they want to be. Like if I just started calling you, a she, and I told you to like get off your rag and to smile more, you might not like that. Now maybe you wouldn't get suicidal right away, but if I spent years and years doing that to you constantly, and I was always around you, that might start to piss you off a little bit.
I don't know. My sisters have called me Kavina and the sister they always wanted for my entire life.
Sounds like they're trying to tell you something, Kev. Is there something they see in you that you don't realize yet?
No.
Are your sisters more open to trans people than you are?
Probably, honestly.
Come on, do you just need a hug?
No, but that was obviously more joking, and I understand where you're coming from, but I feel like in this context, when you're discussing an idea that is more than understood in society, that this is that it's controversial, and that there are people out there very much like me that do not believe that you can change your gender. Now, some are in moderate social settings. I can be respectful of people. I will still heavily disagree with whatever they believe, but I can be moderately respectful. And I think that people that are ardently like you're wrong and you're bad, like that's just not like productive. It's not kind. I believe in being kind by and large, but I feel like if you're going through something like this, you have to be able to understand that there are going to be people out there. It's not necessarily a direct comparison, but I am well aware that a lot of people in my generation, a lot of people on college campuses are not friendly to conservatives that speak up and are honest and blunt about their opinions. I have been physically assaulted for my opinions. I have been verbally assaulted many times. I have had threats made against my life. This is something I knew when I came out as a conservative, that I knew could happen.
What was the point you realized that you were conservative? Was there like a specific moment in time?
Not specifically. My parents I get questions like this. There's more of a specific moment in time when I realized I needed to speak out. When I realized I needed to speak out more, not when I realized I was conservative. That was kind of developed through, because my parents were never politically active. It was what I was told growing up, and I firmly believe, were lessons such as hard work breeds determination, or hard work breeds success. You can do anything if you put your mind to it. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. Things like that. Can
you actually like pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Is that
I'm gonna
possible?
Make a video of me doing it. Good luck. I'll make a video of me.
MLK made a whole joke about this. Like, how are you supposed to do that?
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna figure it out.
Well, if you do it, then props to you. Maybe I'll make
Kev pulls himself up by his bootstraps. But I was raised with that mentality, and then 2016 election came around, and a lot of different opinions were being yelled at me by multiple people in high school. And so I started looking things up and determining where I fell. A lot of it was based on the economy, and I wanted less taxes, and I grew a general distrust of the government. That was another value that was instilled in me growing up, was the idea. It wasn't necessarily hating the government. It was more so no one is a better advocate for you than yourself. And so you should rely on yourself more than you rely on anybody else. And so I don't want the government doing everything for me, nor do I want it taking all my money.
So you know yourself better than other people?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
You're going to try to use that.
and so why don't transgender people know themselves better than you do?
Well, if they genuinely do, then why do they need my validation?
I mean, if I were
not
to
all of them again, but
you've just said that you've been made fun of for being conservative,
and I don't need anybody's validation. I don't need them. I don't need them to be like.
I would assume that in some cases that might have made you feel bad at certain points, that might have given you anxiety at certain points.
Yeah, until I broke free from that.
Okay, and like
because I realized I put way too much value on what other people thought of me.
Okay, I mean, in a lot of trans people, they'll just remove themselves from those types of spaces where that's going to happen. So, I mean, people have different ways of interacting with the world. I can't speak for everybody. But I mean, again, to act as if like the societies around you. I mean, look, if you didn't have Cities 92.9, if you didn't have Turning Points USA, which by the way, you're a big Turning Points USA person.
Yeah.
Do you think that you would have, do you think you'd be more isolated, more lonely if you didn't have these outlets here?
I think I would make my own.
Nope.
I think that's kind of just human nature. When you believe, or when you have a cultural belief of some kind, you will seek. It's honestly a natural tendency.
But do you not think that that having this space here and having other spaces where you and other like-minded conservatives that benefits your mental health? I mean, you go to these places because if you feel better being in these places, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But I also do believe that it benefits my mental health to challenge myself, and it's why my mind has been changed on a lot of different things in my life. And so I think,
I mean, a lot of trans people have gone through immense challenges, and
I'm not trying to minimize that, but
they've been able to survive and go on. And so, I mean, the amount of type of pushback, or, you know, anywhere from verbal threats or to even like physical threats, I mean, that's going to affect you over time, regardless. And I think trans people in general, and even a lot of alphabet people in general, have faced some pretty harsh shit in their lives, and
everybody goes through hard. Well, I
mean, look, I haven't.
The majority of people have gone through something that's very difficult.
Look, I know a lot of trans people that I will objectively say are stronger people than me, and that I am way more privileged growing up and had a way easier life than they did. And
I don't think it needs to be a competition.
They've been able to overcome. I'm just acknowledging that I know trans people that are way stronger, and they have been able to deal with society. Doesn't mean it doesn't feel shitty at times when people like try and invalidate you or things like that. Doesn't mean that never happens. You just develop coping skills for it. So,
okay, I want to talk, because I feel like we kind of hit a place on that one. I want to talk about kids.
Okay.
Because that's where my biggest gripe is. That's where the majority of society's biggest gripe is when it comes to a lot of the not even just the trans stuff, but I want to start with that and then move into the broader LGBTQ stuff. A lot of people feel like they know that there is a gay agenda, not necessarily trying to turn kids gay, but get kids very, very open and recognize sexuality, and very much in the transgender space as well. There's advocates for gender changes at very young ages, 10, 11, 12, 13, young children, and again, my biggest gripe with that is the fact that we don't allow kids at that age to drive a car, own a gun, eat a peanut at school without their parent signing a permission slip. Why is it that people, are you in support of allowing kids at young ages to go through gender transitions?
I don't have a problem with kids changing their gender traits or the way that they express it, like socially transitioning, or, you know, like linguistically transitioning. I don't have a problem with that at pretty much any age, because I don't have that problem. If you're specifically talking about medically transitioning, I mean,
hormone therapies, surgeries, anything.
Yeah, so
that's more what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so I mean, so you don't have a problem with kids socially transitioning?
I have a personal gripe with it, but from a policy,
what is your personal gripe?
Well, because I believe that I believe it's denying fundamental truth. I believe that.
Do you believe we're both masculine? That we're both pretty masculine right here?
I believe we are both biological men.
Okay, that's not the same thing that I'm talking about. I'm talking about differences between behavior and like specific traits.
Sure, I guess. I think when it comes to the social transition, it's not necessarily entirely to an extent not my place to tell parents how to parent their children. To an extent, again, you wouldn't tell, or you got to intervene if a kid is getting abused. You have to like physically, like hardcore emotionally, an objective abuse too. Telling a kid that they shouldn't wear a dress to school is not abuse. Now, hitting that kid because they're wearing a dress to school, that is abuse. So, my point being with that is that there are levels of intervention that are necessary to prevent long-term harm. A parent should know what is going on in their kid's life. So when it comes to social transition, if a parent is perfectly fine with their kid wearing a dress to school and it does not violate school dress codes or anything, and the parent is aware of that transition, then sure. I think it's weird. I think it's wrong. I wouldn't let my kids do it.
Why wouldn't you let your son wear a dress?
Because I would think he is delusional.
For wearing a dress?
Because if he is socially transitioning,
he might not be. He might just say, "I like wearing dresses."
Well,
that might just be the beginning and end of it. It's like, hey, I just like wearing dresses. They're fun to wear.
That even in and of itself contributes to the destruction of gender and sex, and so no,
okay.
And I'm against that. So, but sure, but mainly when my question comes down to the irreversible damage that can be caused from a medical transition at a very young age. Do you believe that is okay? Do you think there's an age at which you should be allowed to medically transition?
Yeah, I mean, I would follow what is called the W path, and W stands for World Professional Association for Transgender Health. I would follow their recommendations, which they don't. One is that in order to medically transition, the guidelines is that your dysphoria has to be insistent, consistent, and persistent. So you have to have extreme dysphoria. So not just because you occasionally like to cross-dress or because you're occasionally effeminate. It has to be a very severe thing that's impairing your life. The other thing is, one of the requirements is that before any type of medical transition begins, according to the WPATH standards, is that you have to account for all other comorbidities. You have to see, are they bipolar? Do they have anxiety or depression that is independent from your gender dysphoria? And so once you've gone through this, what's called a biopsychosocial analysis, and you've determined that perhaps their anxiety is directly being caused by the gender dysphoria, that is at the point where you would maybe begin having the discussions about medically transitioning. And what the WPATH recommends is that there's hormone blockers, which are technically called gonadotropin releasing hormone agonists. And they recommend that anywhere from Tanner stage 2 to Tanner stage 4. And Tanner stage 2 is basically the onset of puberty. And then if you're on that and you still continue to have persistent gender dysphoria, then as you get older, you would do cross hormone therapy. And the overwhelming majority, and I mean, I think there's kind of a sleight of hand that conservatives do, because the word children in English has two different definitions. One is anybody who's under 18. And the second definition is anybody who is a prepubescent minor. And I would argue that there is a massive difference between a 5-year-old child and a 15-year-old child as far as development.
I'll agree with you there, but okay. But again, the way that it gets more into a societal treatment. I mean, again, even at 15, you have to have a parent sign a permission slip to have a peanut at school.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you believe a 15-year-old should be allowed to medically transition?
I mean, I would follow the WPATH standards, which usually requires that.
So if somebody goes through the WPATH and goes through that stuff, then a 15-year-old should be allowed to medically transition.
Yeah. It's part of a clear medical project and hormone replacement therapy has been shown to increase the well-being of teenagers' lives. I mean, do you think that
there are several instances of which you have many that felt that have later come on to regret it?
Yeah.
And they've come out with stories about pressures from their doctor, how easy it was. They don't follow that WPATH. It was basically they had one appointment with their doctor. They never met with a psychiatrist or anything. They had one appointment with their doctor and they got hormone pills there.
Yeah. And so
is that wrong to you?
Yeah. Okay. If you're not following the WPATH standards, then yes, but this is not specific to trans healthcare. There are doctors that don't follow the proper procedures throughout medicine. That's endemic throughout medicine.
You're right.
So that's not as like, oh, well, we need to throw out like all transgender healthcare because some doctors are not doing it right. Because we do have very specific standards that are I was just going over it like yesterday, and it's just like pages and pages of different studies and going very, very, it was very nuanced. And so I think that if you are going to be engaged in that type of therapy, then you should be following the standards as it is. Do I think that you should be able to walk in and necessarily be able to get hormone replacement therapy on your first visit? No, probably not. But again, like I said, I would follow the WPATH standards. And so if a doctor isn't doing it, then that specific doctor is doing something wrong. But it doesn't say that the entire project of trans kids getting health care is somehow wrong. Give me 1 second.
Okay, had to take a quick bathroom break there, everybody, but we are back. So we're on child transitions medically. Let's go to the entire LGBTQ movement as a whole when it comes to children. There's been a lot of talk, especially in things like in places like Florida, around the discussion of sexuality among younger and younger children. Parents are obviously many parents, not all, but many parents are up in arms about this. That bill was framed as the Don't Say Gay bill, which within the bill itself, it didn't say anything.
Yeah, it's called the Florida Parental Rights and Education Act.
Yes. What are your thoughts on things like that?
I think the way that it's worded is very special because it specifically says you're not allowed to talk about, at the time it said from, I think, kindergarten to 3rd or 4th grade, but then it also included incredibly vague language like age appropriate. And it says you're not allowed to speak about sexual orientation or gender identity. But what it says further on down, and this is the part that I think a lot of people miss, is that any person can basically tell the school they need to, if they have a specific issue with whatever, that they can simply tell the school they don't like it. And if the school doesn't like it, or if the school doesn't agree with them on that, they can force the school to hire at the district's cost a special magistrate to review the issue. And so you're going to end up in a situation where, in order to avoid them having to pay, the school having to pay for stuff that is unnecessary, they're just going to follow with whatever that one individual parent said. And I think a better approach would be essentially what happened. Was it with Hayworth? Was it last year?
Yeah.
So there was, and I don't know if you want to explain that, because cities focused a lot more on what happened in Hayworth than I did.
Are you talking about the pornography in the library? Which one are you talking
there was, I think there was an 8th grade English teacher who had like a sex ed book in her personal library.
Yes. Yeah, that's pretty much, that's essentially you say sex ed, it had pornographic material in it.
Well, I mean, it's not
like definitively pornographic, like naked bodies and everything.
But I mean, it's not very good sex ed unless you're showing sexually explicit thing. That's not very good sex ed if you don't actually like show
also pushed gay. It talked about gay sex in it and ways for pleasurable sex.
Do you want to teach unpleasurable sex?
Well, I think that
you want to teach people how to have bad sex. I mean, what?
No, I don't believe that. I don't believe that sex ed needs to focus on the pleasure side of it. I think it should simply be. I mean, I thought my sex ed growing up was great, and it didn't really. In my main sex ed was not in 8th grade. I think that was where the inappropriate, a lot of the inappropriateness comes from it. I had in 7th grade we had sex ed that was focused on purely like the reproductive system and how that works. 7th grade, okay. On the reproductive system, period. And that was that and how that worked. That was the first time that we had both genders in the same classroom. It started off in 5th grade. We talked about puberty, separate rooms for the sexes. And then 7th grade was purely reproductive. And then like sophomore year of high school, we had our sex ed health class. And that was where it got a little bit more into the weeds and the details about how sex occurs, the effects it can have on the body, STDs, contraception that's the word I was looking for, contraception. But they also did say every single time when we talked about contraception, which I did like, was that yes, condoms work this amount of time, the pill works this amount of time, other things work this amount of time, but abstinence still is the 100% most effective way to avoid STDs and pregnancy.
Are you aware of any sex ed program that isn't saying that?
Well, oftentimes people want to, like, whenever you bring up abstinence period, they're like, well, that's not realistic. And that's not we should not be teaching abstinence. We should not be teaching abstinence. And I think it should be always made 100% clear. And I have not been in every single health classroom in the country, but I guarantee you that there are others that did not take as strong of an approach as mine, that stress how abstinence is the best way to prevent all of the issues that can arise due to sexual activity.
I mean, the only time that I've heard that specific argument made is when people are trying to say we need abstinence only education as a way to argue that we should only have abstinence. Even in I went to schools back when I was a lad in the 2000s. I had segregated sex ed for, a couple days in 5th grade, joint sex ed in 8th grade. And then it was basically usually you took freshman year health class, and then it was part of that. And abstinence was included in it, but I think the reality is that this may actually be an essential quality of teenagers. They will find ways to do things their parents do not want them to do. And so only teaching them abstinence is typically very ineffective at preventing teen pregnancies and sex ed. But I'm not aware of any sex ed program that has said that.
I'm not abstinence only. I just want to be clear that I think that should be a part of it. But again, nowhere in there was it. We talked about sensitivities of the genitals and stuff in my sophomore year health class. Again, sophomore year, you're in high school, but we never got into here are the positions you should have for good sex, which was things that were included in that Hayworth 8th grade book.
Yeah, I mean,
we never talked about anything. It was never about sexuality. It was sexuality in terms of
you didn't know about gay people at all. They didn't talk about gay people at all.
We didn't talk about gay sex. We didn't talk about. No, it was not about. It wasn't even purely about heterosexual sex.
Did they ever mention oral sex or anal sex?
We discussed that.
Okay,
but not from a sexuality point of view. We didn't talk about the pleasures of it or anything. It was never about. It was very much based on here's what can happen if you do these things. I think that a lot of it, honestly, kind of went with the predication that by 15, 16, most young adults know that there are pleasures that can come along with sex, and that is not for the school to teach.
I mean, typically in sex ed, it's best to learn about sex and healthy relationships and stuff like the dangers of porn before you encounter them in the real world. Waiting until people have already found them is not always going to be the most effective way at actually properly educating people. And so I don't have a problem with, basically the way that you and I had it, where we started those beginning sex education talks in 5th grade. I'm not aware. I mean, I don't hang out at schools. That would be a really bad look for me.
It'd be really weird.
People would really be like, Zach, what are you doing? No, I don't do that. So I don't know if it's, to my understanding, it isn't being taught. I mean, look, I used to volunteer for Planned Parenthood for a long time. One of the projects that I worked on was getting comprehensive sex ed passed in Illinois back in the early 2010s or the late 2000s. So I am somewhat familiar. And at that time, it was basically making sure that all schools did comprehensive sex education from, it was either 5th or 6th grade through 12th. And so that's specifically what it was focusing on. I don't have a problem being like, if you do this, it's greater chance that it's going to be painful. I don't have a problem teaching people how to enjoy their bodies or stuff like that in an educational setting. I think that you can do. There's plenty of sex education platforms all across the internet that are not that are doing exactly that. They're saying, look, this is the best way that you can, if you do choose to have sex and you do choose to hopefully have safe sex, that these are the best ways that you can actually. I don't want to teach people how to have bad sex. I don't want to teach people how to have painful sex. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
I understand where you're coming from with that. I just don't believe it's our one. I don't trust teachers enough to get into any of that, nor do I believe it's necessarily the school system's job to get into all of the nitty gritty regarding that. I do think that parents should be having conversations with their kids about things like that.
But the evidence shows that in general, they're not always
okay.
Well,
then that's a parental flaw.
But then here's the other thing.
But I believe
from an educational standpoint, kids tend to learn more, not only when it's not their parents telling them, but also when it's not their teacher. So oftentimes schools will bring in experts, and that tends to be better for the kids because, they have existing relationships with their teachers. It's better to get it from someone that they don't have, these like kind of long-term personal relations, because they feel that they can, more openly ask those questions and stuff like that. So again, that's what the kind of data has shown. And since like your generation, as I call them, Zoomers,
they're not all though. They're not all Gen. They're Gen Z, but they're not all Boomer mentality. I'm not even fully.
Well, I don't think a Zoomer is a Boomer mentality.
Well,
anyway,
that's where it comes from, though. It's Gen Z Boomer. That's
or the fact that you all had to use Zoom for a long time.
Oh, okay, I get that. That makes more sense.
There's a way. Anyway, but like we found that with your generation, teenagers are on average waiting longer to have sex, and they're having less sex, and that is
those are not the statistics I've seen.
Well, then we're seeing different things, but and that is because of comprehensive sex education, and even more so because of lots of information that's available on the internet. So, like, I don't have a problem with kind of the way.
What about K through 4? Essentially, because that's what the parental rights and again, that's when people want to talk about sex. That's when there have been accolades of teachers that discuss homosexuality and sexuality, period, with young children.
Do you think teaching kids about good touch and bad touch is a form of sex ed?
It depends on how it's done.
I mean, I remember in 3rd grade being like, if someone touches you, like describing the difference between private places and like private places and whether that's okay and not okay. I remember having that. It's like, it's not okay if someone touches you in this area. It's not your fault. You should reach out to an adult, etc. Like, I consider that an early form of sex ed.
I don't necessarily consider it an early form of sex ed.
But it's about your sex parts, and it's about potential sexual abuse. So that's...
It was.
I mean, if the difference is just
semantics, because it can also relate to just the idea of assault period and battery period. Like it's just.
But I remember having
more about personal space.
I remember having a specific
interaction. That's interaction education.
I mean, but I remember having maybe, I don't know if you did or not. I remember in primary school, I think it was 3rd grade, having, one day having a specific conversation about being not allowing people to touch you in your private areas.
That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm asking about. What I'm asking about is genuine sexuality. Like you will have teachers of elementary school students that will get into pride, homosexuality, and all of and many ideas of sexuality. Young children exposed to books that do have pornographic images in them.
Do you think there's a distinction between sexual relationships and romantic relationships?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that it's okay to teach elementary school students that homo-romantic relationships there's nothing inherently wrong with them, you shouldn't bully people because of it, and that it's okay?
I see there's nothing inherently wrong with it is the only one that I don't remember the preface of the question. I just remember
I mean, that's
do I think that's because like, I don't necessarily believe that there is nothing inherently wrong with a homosexual relationship. And that's where it becomes a problem for me, because if we're not going to be also teaching the Bible in schools, or at least at age appropriate levels, then because within the Bible, there is something inherently wrong with a homosexual relationship.
I mean, I don't really
I do agree. Well, but if we're going to talk about the idea that kids should be exposed to different ideas, then shouldn't they also be exposed to the idea that, hey, maybe there is something wrong with it? And because there's parents that believe that. And again, I believe that parents should be leading a lot of these discussions. I don't believe in, and again, if they're not, that's a parental fault. But it is not always the job of the school to make up for where parents.
There's
fail.
Parents that also believe in creationism. I don't think we should be teaching that in school either. So, I mean, look, I don't care if I don't care if somebody's magic book or whatever says that homosexuality is wrong, because I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with homosexuality. Just because something is not the norm does not inherently mean that it is morally wrong.
That's
Like
not.
I
That's
don't.
not. I mean, Leviticus 18:22 says.
Again, I don't care what the Bible. That's never
Okay,
going to be a convincing argument.
But but I know I'm not trying. But the argument I'm trying to make is that because people hold different beliefs on that issue, along with the fact that teaching sexuality, teaching any level of sexuality at that very young age, and again, the way you are expressing your sexuality, there's no reason why a young child should be exposed to, oh, like you might want to be attracted to a boy. There's no reason that you need to be talking about that. A teacher needs to be having that conversation with young children.
I mean, if elementary school students already know enough to make fun of a person with gay parents, then maybe that conversation, they already know enough that that's occurring, that there are homoromantic relationships that occur. If they already know at that early age to make fun of it, then yeah, I think to make somebody make fun of someone because they have gay parents or something.
Then focus the conversation on anti-bullying.
Okay, but I mean, again, that's all I'm talking about. I mean, that's all I'm talking about.
You don't. You can tell somebody that it is not okay to make fun of somebody because of who their parents are, who they are, things like that.
Okay,
but again, there are classrooms in this country that include sexually explicit material at K through 5. Would you be, or K through 3, K through 4, because 5 obviously we have the puberty talk, but at that very young age. Is that wrong? Yes or no?
Maybe the specific things that you're talking about that I'm not familiar, it might be. I mean, do you
sexually explicit material?
Okay. Do you think that we should teach elementary school students, and we could sex segregate it if they want, the accurate names for all their external body parts?
No, I don't think there's a necessity for that.
Okay, because here's the problem: is that oftentimes families, they will make nicknames or code names for private areas. And I've heard this story. I mean, it may just be anecdotal, but I've heard it multiple times about a kindergarten girl who kept telling her kindergarten teacher, my uncle eats my cookie. And she kept saying it, initially the teacher's just like, oh, okay. And then she keeps saying, it's like, what is this? Who is this guy? The Cookie Monster? What is going on? Why is she always eating this guy's cookie? And then she finally asked the parents during a parent-teacher conference saying, why does she keep saying that? Turns out Cookie was a nickname that they gave for a private area. And so if that child had known the medically accurate name for that external body part, that teacher could have prevented abuse from occurring.
Well, it sounds like
I mean, this is the whole reason. If a child
came up and said something to me, it sounds like that teacher's dumb, because I would have I feel like I would have asked the question of, well, what is that? Like, what do you mean your cookie?
Man,
why are you telling me that? What do you mean your cookie? And then they probably would have made a motion to the area of like, I feel like to me, that story sounds, and I'm not necessarily saying you're a liar or anything. That story sounds super.
I'm just saying, I'm saying that type of thing is very common because the accurate names are not given. That's what I'm saying, is that giving as accurate information as possible is actually a preventative measure. It prevents abuse from occurring. So I don't have a problem if at a young age all you do is just to give the medically accurate names for all your external body parts. I don't care if you sex segregate it, that's fine. But actually give them the medically accurate names. I think that will actually prevent abuse from occurring.
Okay, but again, so you gave an anecdote there. There's a school. I'll give an anecdote, a hypothetical, because again, to me, at best, that was a hypothetical as well. So there's a classroom, and a teacher has a book on the shelf that includes sexually explicit material, open for all the first graders to see. When I say sexually explicit, it has pictures of a man going down on a woman going with a woman, man going with a man, fully nude. Is that wrong in a first grade classroom?
I would probably not want. I probably would say that shouldn't be in that specific classroom.
Okay.
And so, but if there's books in your classroom that you don't want, go to your school board, tell the school board, and the school board can democratically decide. That's why I think, even though I disagreed with the Hayworth decision, where they ended up firing that teacher who had this sex education book in her 8th grade personal library, at least that went through the actual democratic process, as opposed to the way that the laws are constructed in Florida, where one person can force the school district to pay money to investigate stuff, and then it ends up not being a democratic decision. There could have been the majority of parents in that district that didn't have a problem with some specific book or some specific thing, but instead of actually allowing the democratic process to go, that's what I see occurring with the Parental Responsibility Act in Florida, and I think that's a problem, because I think you're actually undermining democracy. There may be plenty of parents that are like, no, I don't have a big deal with that. Let that happen.
Okay,
So,
I understand where you're coming from. That I think we found some common ground in there.
Well, one last thing. Do you think that in K-4 that the concept of consent should be talking? I'm not talking about sexual consent, merely the concept of consent to hug someone, consent to hold someone's hand, consent to play with somebody. Do you think that is something that should be taught at a very early age?
I mean, yeah, but it's not. Again, it's not in any way sexual. It's not. It's more about teaching personal space.
Yeah.
Personal.
But later on, having that foundation can help with sex education.
I mean, you're taught when you're in first grade not to hit people.
Yeah,
like in a way that's a form of consent.
Yeah, but again, I mean a very clear delineation of, like, even saying the word consent, of very clearly teaching out these concepts. And I'm not talking about in a sexual nature, but I think that is a form that could potentially be a form of proto-sex education that can occur in K through fourth grade.
Yeah,
and I think,
I think by and large, the people that are on my side, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments,
yes,
but
please do.
The people on my side, we don't really see that as sex education, but that's also not what people are angry about. People are angry about sexuality, like about the vastness of sexuality, homosexuality, polygamy, even certain levels of heterosexuality being discussed in classrooms. And they might be extreme examples, but they are happening. And so nobody is for what I understand. If you are, I'd love to have you on my show to talk about it, because I'd likely argue with you, but nobody is up in arms about saying, Johnny, you have to ask to hug Susie. Like, nobody is mad about that.
Okay, but I mean, that's what I believe some of the education that's occurring at that level is. But under that Florida bill, if you say that it's okay for two men to be married or two women to be in a relationship, and you don't mention anything about sex, one parent could possibly make a claim, and that could be excused. That could be prohibited from being said, because you might be willing to make a distinction between romantic and sexual. A lot of people aren't. A lot of people freak out because in this Disney show, at the very last episode, it showed two women that live together married, and then they automatically assume that is somehow implying sexuality when it's just implying romance. So there are people on your side that absolutely think that even anything romantic somehow implies sexuality.
I think it does have a level of implication.
Then what's the difference between showing that men and women are in relationships? Is it just because that's the norm? I'm like men and women are in romantic relationships. We learn that very, very young, that men and women, it's very common for men and women to be in romantic relationships. Because
one, that's the natural state.
Yeah, it's the norm.
It's the natural state, and the fact that there is no biological there's no biological benefit other than pleasure to be in a homosexual relationship.
I mean, yeah, even in a romantic relationship, there's pleasure involved. I enjoy being around.
Well, absolutely, but there are other benefits to a heterosexual relationship that are not included in a.
Yeah, but there's lots of hetero romantic relationships that have they don't want to have kids. That has nothing to do with that.
And I look down on them just as much.
I mean, okay, I am for freedom here, and Kevin looks down on freedom.
No,
that's what he just said.
I'm not saying that you can't necessarily choose to do that. I'm just saying that I think that's not a policy discussion. I'm not saying you should say, oh man, if you're gonna be married, you have to have children. I'm just saying that I think you're wasting your time.
Do you think homosexuality is a sin?
Yes, I do believe homosexuality is a sin, but I also believe a lot of things that I do are a sin. I want to be clear there too. I can drink too much.
I've heard about them. I'm just kidding.
I can drink.
I'm not trying to out you.
I've lusted after people. I am a sinner. I do believe homosexuality is a sin. My problem is not necessarily with the sin itself. It's that we exalt the sin as if it's like I am not proud of my lust. I'm not proud of my lust. The entire idea of the LGBTQ movement is called pride. So they're engaging in pride of their sin. And again, that gets into a biblical argument.
Do you think that homosexuals that don't repent are going to hell?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe that if I don't repent for the sins that I do, I will also be damned to hell. So
well, I hope you do repent. Do you go to confession?
I do.
Okay, good.
I do. So
otherwise I'd worry about your eternal soul, man.
I know you would.
I would. Yeah.
You would?
My grandfather's Catholic.
Aren't you
My
an
grandma,
atheist?
I am, but
You're an
I worry about. I don't worry about my eternal soul. I worry about your eternal soul.
What if we're
okay?
all right? I know this is like getting on a tangent here, but what if we're all right? Like, I've always thought about this. Like, what if whatever you believe in is what is right?
if everybody's right.
So like I get to go to heaven, but you just have nothingness for the rest of your life.
I mean, that seems to be the most likely outcome, is that there's just nothingness afterwards. So I don't see a lot of evidence for heaven, but
like, so we're all right.
Well.
All the
but
Hamas terrorists, they get all get their 72 virgins.
That's, I mean, I wouldn't mind getting 72. they don't have to be virgins, just like 72 people that can have fun for all eternity. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, as long as they're all adults and we're all consenting, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that, and if that's what heaven has in store for us. So
Hamas doesn't really care if they're consenting. So, but no, but
I mean, that's also the thing about pride, is that pride is specifically a political movement, and it's a political movement saying that there's nothing inherently wrong with us engaging in non-normative, consensual, sexual or romantic relationships, and we shouldn't be discriminated against for that. That is what the movement of pride is.
Do you understand why people don't take it seriously?
Yeah, because some people think that it's a sin and that you're going to go.
Well, but that's not the only reason. I mean, like, hey, if there was,
but that's the foundation. I mean, your religion is the foundational principle. It's an unconscious principle that guides everything that you believe in, right?
In part, but the other let's just take it to a very like face value level. If there was a group of heterosexual people that had their own pride type organization that went around preaching that we engage in weird crap sexually, but only heterosexually,
weird,
and they were walking around.
Weird to you.
Well, okay. I say by and large a lot, but overwhelmingly society would deem it as unorthodox.
If you want to have a straight
behavior.
pride parade, go ahead and do it.
No. But I mean, like but in their parade and in their celebration, they're walking around fully naked, or with like dildos strapped to their chests and everything. I wouldn't take them seriously either. That's why
that's fine if you don't want to take them seriously. But the one thing that we've learned in this country is if you ever want to get things done, you have to bitch and complain about it to the point where if people get so annoyed, they're like, fine, do it, whatever. I mean, that's been the history of movements in this country since the founding.
Yes, but there's a difference between bitching and moaning and just being obscene for the sake of being obscene.
I mean,
because you want to know who by your standards bitched and moaned long enough until it was fine. Like people who marched on Washington for Black civil rights, which for the most part were dressed very, very professionally, looked very good, were very cared about how they presented themselves in public. Even the forefathers of the Pride movement, like Harvey Milk, were not preaching to walk around with dildos strapped to your chest and shake your ass in front of little children on the streets of Chicago.
And the overwhelming majority of the people in the country opposed the 1963 March on Civil Rights. Like the overwhelming majority of people did not like MLK Jr., regardless of what he dressed like at that time. Now we lionize MLK Jr. At the time that in the 60s that he was alive, polls show that most people did not like him. So, I mean, you can dress however you want in that specific instance. I don't know if that's always going to have as big of an effect as it is.
I will take somebody more seriously if they present themselves in a professional manner. Not to mention the fact that, again, it is public obscenity. Like if I was caught outside taking a whiz in Central Illinois, so my dick is out, I could get arrested for public nudity.
If you're
there are people at these pride parades that are.
If you're in an alleyway, I don't think that you should get arrested for public nudity. If you're in an alleyway and you just gotta go to the bathroom real quick, and I think that's wrong. And you could also be put on like the sex offenders list, which I also think is wrong. Just because you're trying to go to the bathroom.
I actually know people that are on a sex offender list because they were taking a whiz in an alley. I know people that are in that same have been in that situation. But my point is what about what? In the Pride movement, do you believe that people should be out on the streets, buck naked, waving everything around with children present as well?
I mean, I believe that in society, we already allow certain forms of nudity in certain specific places. We have nudist beaches, we have nudist colonies. And I see pride events as very similar. Like at this specific type of event, there might be. I mean, I've been to some of these big pride parades. I haven't seen like to me like the nudity that is most is when like your genitals are actually showing. I don't care if people are walking around topless. I don't care if women are walking around topless. I think they should be able to walk around topless because hashtag feminism. But I haven't personally seen. They might be in very skimpy clothing, but again, I don't. This might be a difference between you and I don't see the body as inherently sinful, or if there's anything like explicitly wrong about the human body.
Do you think it'd be but do you think that could you understand the reasoning why people would not want children in attendance at these events?
Yeah, don't take your kids there then. It's really that simple. Just don't I'm not going to force you to take your kids there.
Why?
If you in your future children sometime in the future.
I know that, but so then shouldn't they be, because there have been many that are advertised as fun for the whole family?
Yeah. Again, I don't see anything again, we have nudist colonies where whole families go, and it has nothing to do with anything like specifically sexual at those nudes. They just like to be nude. I don't see anything inherently wrong with the human body.
Where do you derive your morals from? Do you have them?
Do I have morals? Yes, I have morals. Are you actually?
It's a genuine question.
I mean, yes. Are you asking if I have if I believe in certain natural made morals or God, objective morals?
Kind of, yeah. Kind of. That's kind of. I'm just wondering where is your book? Obviously not necessarily. It's kind of a. It's not the exact way I want to word it, but what is your what code do you follow in your life, and why do you follow that?
I mean, I base my morals on basically the habits and that we learn from society, and I especially base them on certain ways of being free.
So the habits we learn from society. So
yeah, and
the significant portion of our morals in our society are fundamentally, a lot of them, not all, but some very, very basic levels of them are fundamentally Judeo-Christian.
Yeah, and I mean in Western society. I mean,
and that's the society you grew up in.
Well, I mean, we have a very secular interpretation in the West of a lot of those. So, but I mean, it used to be moral to beat and or sexually assault your wife. So I mean, I don't agree with that. There are all sorts of things that in tradition that I don't agree with.
I'm going with the very basic level, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not.
That shall not unjustifiably. There are justified reasons that you can kill somebody. If somebody's attacking you, you have the right to defend yourself.
Yeah,
and that's what that commandment specifically means.
But that's what I mean. It's not even just in the commandment sense. Just the idea of those are a lot of our fundamental morals. You're not going to violate somebody else's personal space in terms of crimes such as rape, assault, battery, anything like that.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
So yeah,
we shouldn't do that.
Those are all fun. Those all were derived from, and the reason why they are enshrined into law are because of the Bible.
No, they weren't. They weren't enshrined because of the Bible. They were enshrined because they make societal sense. I mean, it's not as if societies prior to the Bible ever being written didn't have these rules. I mean, that's kind of silly. I think that's silly, but so
I mean. Actually, societies before the Bible existed, many of them didn't. Some of them didn't.
I mean, if they didn't have those
rules,
if they didn't,
it was a lot of that was influenced by Judeo-Christian ideology.
Well, I mean,
so what I'm trying to say here is that a sense of your morality stems from Judeo-Christian ideology.
I believe that there are plenty of societies that have existed that had no connection with Judeo-Christianity that did in fact outlaw murder and assault and rape and stuff like that. So I guess I just disagree with the premise. I agree with all those things for whatever reason, based on how, the way that these types of things unconsciously build up into you over time, and morality is itself kind of a social construction. For whatever reason, hearing about somebody just indiscriminately murder somebody, it gives me a visceral feeling against that. And so that's
Why?
why I'm against. I don't know. I don't think there's ever going to be a clear explanation for some of the things of why specifically that attaches itself to me, that gives me a visceral reaction to it. But I do have that, and I'm willing to defend that is not the right thing to do, to just indiscriminately murder people. So
you don't really know where your morality is derived from. Basically, just social constructs.
Yeah, I mean, that's where it's derived from.
That's where your morality is coming from.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think that's technically where all of our morality is. You can write it down in a book. I mean, and there's plenty of books on morality, whether it's from the Bible or not. But ultimately, I think they all just come, like the ought statements, what one ought to do and what one ought not to do, ultimately just come down to the habits that we learn from society and tradition, and then we can reflect on those on our own. And again, there's lots of things that were taught in the Bible that I think are morally abhorrent. So
do you think there's such thing as objective morality?
No.
I
don't think there's some morality like hidden out there in nature. I mean, look, this is something that's called like the is-ought distinction.
Yeah.
Is statements or descriptive statements are not the same as ought statements. So there's something called the naturalistic fallacy, where just because something is natural, you assume that it is moral. It's a fallacy. Like cancer is natural. I don't think most of us would think that it ought to occur. So
I understand what you're saying.
I mean, that's the distinction between is statements, like actual natural things, and then ought statements, which, I mean, yes, they're subjective. They're subjective in the way that there's not like this eternal essentializing, foundationalizing. And again, just with murder, there are legitimate reasons that you can unalive somebody. Like there are legitimate reasons to do that. Even within the Bible has all sorts of exceptions on when you're allowed to do that.
Yeah.
So there's always nuance and context involved. I mean, obviously, I don't think nature has a specific rule somewhere hidden that says don't murder. I mean, go try out and go into the woods and come into a tiger and say, oh no, I'm a human, I have a natural right not to be killed, and see what the tiger says. The tiger doesn't care. The tiger's going to eat you. I mean, if it thinks you're tasty, maybe it'll bite you and not think you're very tasty. I don't know.
Okay, we've talked
we're
about
at 312.
Getting into morality. I know we don't have too much time left here. I want to talk about journalism a little bit. You're a local journalist. I don't necessarily classify myself as a journalist. I know there's some questions that I think you had on this topic, and I think there's actually a lot more common ground that we'll find. Maybe some disagreement on the idea of journalism nowadays, fake news, real news. What does that mean? Everything like that.
You care if we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, that works.
Okay. But I'm glad we had a good alphabet war.
Absolutely. Well, okay. So journalism. How long have you been in your kind of independent journalism sphere?
I would say probably since 2018 is when I first started my blog, which at the time it's still called strangecornersofthought.com, because I just have a couple different aspects of my life.
Yeah.
But I consider my journalistic side to be what I call agitation rising, which you can find on my Strange Corners of Thought blog. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook and on Twitter, Agitation Rising. And it's usually, a lot of it is just me at various marches and protests that I've been at, just recording. I've done interviews. Obviously, I've done pieces where I actually respond to people or respond on certain issues. I've responded to some things that you said a couple times, and I had to correct myself at a very, very grievous error I don't think I'll ever live down. But yeah, so
at least you didn't misgender me. So
not yet.
Not yet. Go for it. Every time you reference me, you have my full permission to call me a she. Okay. I don't care.
All right.
I don't care. I've identified it as a woman when it's convenient for me.
Yeah. So. I mean, if you identified as a woman to me, I probably wouldn't believe you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I identify as a woman.
I don't believe you.
Well, that's perfectly fine. You're just a transphobe.
Well, no. I mean, you want to know why?
Why?
Because you don't appear to have any secondary female sex characteristics. You don't appear feminine in any way.
I don't have an Adam's apple. I don't have a profound Adam's apple. I've always been very self-conscious about
that's
it.
one. That's one male sex characteristic.
I've been very self-conscious about my entire life.
You don't appear
to had to basically tangentially bring it up like that.
Yeah, so you don't appear to be feminine in any way. You don't go by any feminine linguistics, and also I've heard the words that come out of your mouth, so that's why I would be skeptical if you just came up and said that to me. So, but that's how I base that on. I mean, if someone tells me that, I'm like, okay, maybe.
Now I get you. Okay, but journalism, we've had this conversation before, like privately, in terms of I don't consider myself a journalist, and you tell me I'm selling myself short.
I think you are selling yourself short. I mean, do you report on factual information?
Yes. Well, I do report on non-factual information. That's
Like what?
well, I report on when the president lies to people.
But
I
it's
reported on Republican.
factually true that he's lying.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? And I agree with you. The presidents lie a lot. It's probably an essential quality of the job is to lie. Might be part of their essence.
The
or
government
something.
lies to us more than it tells the truth. That's one of
Yes.
my staples. But no, I don't consider myself a journalist. I'm an opinion host. I'm not. I'm rarely. There's been times where I've had journalistic qualities. I mean, like when I have gone to I've gone to some protests and things. I've interviewed different politicians and such, and those might be more journalistic. But overall, my show is I take other articles or I take other news stories and
You report on them,
I give my opinion on them.
but you report on them and then give your opinion on them.
But I give my opinion on them.
So, I mean, do you think that's the difference? Is whether you actually whether you show explicitly are showing your own bias or your own opinion on it? You think that's the difference between a journalist and allegedly what you do?
Well, and again, because I see like Washington Post and I see New York Times and so many of these mainstream media sources, and I'll tell people they do the same thing I do. It's not journalism. They're just giving their opinion. I do believe that there is a sense of near objective journalism still out there, but I don't. But it's far and few between.
Well, like who? Like, can you give an example?
My best example, I don't talk about it very much on my show or anything like that. But I have a sister who's a journalist.
Don't tell anybody.
For a major news network. And I don't believe the news network itself is in and of itself objective. But when I try to have conversations with her about things that are going on in the world, I'll try to get her opinion.
Even privately?
Even privately.
She's like hardcore on
She is
that.
hardcore. Like I will try to have conversations and I'll be like, what's your opinion? And she's like, well, this is what's going on this side and this is what's going on this side. And I'm just mad because it's consuming my life because it's my job. And that's how she talks to me about it. And then I'll give my opinion on something and then she will push against it. And like, I know based on her upbringing that she likely more agrees with me, that she is not actually in belief of whatever she is arguing with me. She's doing it because that's like what she does professionally. And she knows that it gets on my nerves sometimes. So
you don't like,
so I know that there are a sense of objective journalists out there or near objective journalists that are more quality of what journalism is supposed to be.
I mean,
so that's why I try to make a distinction. And again, I don't believe that it's the overwhelming majority of journalism. I don't believe that most people that claim to be journalists are genuinely journalists. I think most are in some way an opinion piece, opinion host, opinion writer, anything like that. But
I mean, so regarding your secret sister, I would say that the bias.
It's not a secret that I have a sister. I just don't talk about her job or anything because I don't want it to.
That's valid. You're valid in having that belief. I mean, and this might not even always be her choice, but the choice on I'm going to specifically focus on this. Like I'm going to specifically focus on the speaker's race. That's the choice that maybe, probably it's just her boss is telling her that she has to do that. But that is itself a certain type of perspective that's being presented.
Kind of, but also like her job at the network is to cover things that are coming out of Congress. And so
they think, and that's the perspective that like these certain things from Congress are specifically more important than other issues. Like that's the perspective that exists. So like, NPR, which, whether they like to,
but again, that's not the individual. Like I'm sure if she was able to, and she was able to make as much, have all the benefits and everything, just doing her own independent journalism, and there weren't the barriers to entry, she would do it heavily objectively. And
wait, heavily subjectively or objectively?
Objectively, herself. Like
okay,
if she was able to do it herself and have all the benefits that she has working with the major network, and she was able to do it independently, she would do it objectively. I firmly believe that. It is not her as a journalist that is providing the slant. It is the powers that be that employ her.
Yeah, but I mean, even what you just said, if like she was able to make her own decisions of what she wanted to cover, again, like I just think a lot of this journalism, which I mean, a lot of it's very good. I'm sure she's a great journalist at providing accurate information. I provide I believe I provide, as far as I know, I've made corrections if I've gotten facts on the ground wrong. But like I always provide accurate information. Now, oftentimes I'll make predictions that end up being wrong. And I feel that is something different than, and a lot of journalists will not make predictions. But like, for instance, I made a prediction there was going to be a horrible COVID outbreak at the McLean County Jail. I was wrong about that. There was not a horrible COVID outbreak in comparison to a lot of other jails. Now, the reason he did that is because he had people on like 23-hour-a-day solitary confinement, which is also something that I fundamentally disagree with. But I admitted that I got that prediction wrong, and I do make corrections. If I do get information wrong. I mean, do you think that you would ever, like, as an opinion, that you should make corrections if you get something wrong?
If I get something factually wrong, yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I always say, correct me in the comments or something. And if I'm genuinely wrong, I will admit it in some form or fashion somewhere. So
did you report that Target was selling trans swimsuits to children?
I reported that they were selling swimsuits that were for children that were specifically for transgender individuals. Yes.
Because that wasn't true. It was. No, like if you go look at it, it was only for adult sizes.
Then why was it in the kids section?
I don't. It might have been advertised together with other kids' clothes, but it was not for children. I mean, I've seen Target respond to this, and if you go look at it, it's only in adult sizes.
It's in the, and they also even if it was, you're talking about just the swimsuits, they had children's T-shirts that were pro-trans, pro-gay.
Right, but it's not the same thing. It
is the same thing. I mean, it's because the point wasn't the point wasn't the swimsuit in and of itself. It was the display. It was its location.
If it wasn't the swimsuit itself, then you wouldn't have focused so hard on the fact that it wasn't just the swimsuit that I was talking about. But that specific information is what I'm trying to tell you, is that specific information that they were explicitly selling children's swimsuit. And to be clear, I don't have a problem if you sell swimsuits to trans children. That personally doesn't bother me. But the actual fact is that they were not selling trans swimsuits to children. It was only in adult sizes. They were only selling it, and kids don't fit into adult sizes.
I don't know that to be true or not. Okay. I'll take your word for it for the sake of this. But
I can send you my sources.
Okay.
So, but I mean, like, there's things like that. Like,
I'll put it in the description of that video to ensure that everybody is clear. And I apologize if I did get that small fact wrong, but again, that wasn't but that's also why I claim I'm an opinion host, because I will apologize if I get something wrong,
but it's not
like
super
factually wrong. But the overall message is not hindered by that small detail, because the overall message and purpose was not hindered by that small detail. Now, if I claim to be a journalist, it would be much more important to me.
I think that specific fact has a lot more influence on what people believe than just saying, oh, there were shirts with rainbow flags on it. I think that has a lot more influence on how people feel about a specific issue.
Rainbow flags. I also discussed the entire outlet that they had that was a partnership with somebody that had like it was a very, very like demonic depictions that said like trans on it and things as well. Like, that were
trans what? Trans are okay?
I have to look it up.
Okay. I mean, we don't have to get too focused on that. I'm just trying to like go on this like one point. Like, yeah. But you are willing to make corrections.
It wasn't just rainbow flags. My point being was that
is
that there was other things that were advertised that I found morally reprehensible.
And if you're interviewing somebody that, I mean, most of the people that you interview that I've seen, I haven't watched everything you've ever done. Most of the people that you interview are people that you typically end up agreeing with. I mean, do you think that you're going to go out of your way to ask them difficult questions?
So there actually has been times where I have where I've tried to push back on some of them on some things, or that I will ask questions that are attempting to represent a different point of view. One example was a city council candidate that I was interviewing here had made a claim about a candidate that I was not favorable towards, but I pushed back on him and I was like, because he made a claim that she had said something. And I was like, I don't necessarily believe that she had said that. I've talked to her. I don't necessarily agree with her on everything, but I don't believe that she said that. Can you show me where she said that? And he was unable to. And I voted for him. I'll be flat out. I voted for him. But I pushed back.
Voted for a liar. I'm just kidding.
We all vote for liars.
We all vote for liars. That's true.
But there was that one. I when it came to Riley Gaines, I knew I was going to agree with her on almost everything that she'd said. But I asked a question of, regarding the biological advantages of Leah Thomas. And I asked, well, some people claim, Leah Thomas had come in fifth and you also came in fifth. If there is such a biological advantage, why did he come in fifth?
She came in 8th, 5th, and 1st in different races. Yeah.
First in others, multiple firsts. It was
No, she had one first at that specific race.
Well,
and it was 9 seconds behind the world record.
There had been ones before.
I'm sure there had been other races, but the main thing was just 96.
Riley brought up a lot more of her record.
Yeah.
And so that's my point. I do try to ask questions, even if from another perspective.
And she gave her feelings that it's clear to me based on my feelings that they evidence. The evidence was that she came in 8th, 5th, and 1st. That she did really good in one race. She tied with Riley. Riley got the exact same score as she did, and then 4 other cis women blew them both out of the water, and then she came in 8th in another one, which means 7 other cis women blew her out of the water. So I mean, that's the actual empirical evidence. Riley had a feeling that she must have been throwing the race because that's as if Leah Thomas winning that one race didn't get her like tons of hate, as if it would have been that much bigger had she won another race. I mean, that's one of those things. I mean, I remember watching that interview and I was like,
but my point of what I'm saying, it wasn't the answer Riley gave. It was you posed the question of, don't you think that, yes, I will have a bias when I'm talking to a lot of these people.
Yeah.
I try my best to ask tougher questions and to remove my bias a bit at times, because I want to get that person's full understanding of whatever situation it is that I'm talking about with them. But that's another reason why I'm not necessarily a journalist. Well, I want to find different answers and poke holes in arguments to get to answers. I will be forthright when I agree with them. I will not. I'm not going to hide who I am.
What do you think about? Because you had a situation. What was it, last year, or it was earlier this year was, at the locally. ISU where you were a student at?
Yep.
Where you're a student at? You want to go over that?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you've been following my channel, it's like my second live stream I ever did on my channel. I talked about how I was escorted out of a public event by the police. It was technically hosted by our local NPR station.
WGLT.
Yeah, WGLT.
State-sponsored media.
I always tell people that it's basically just NPR, because it is NPR.
Yeah.
It's because everybody understands that then. But so state-sponsored media. And so it's public. The event was on a public campus, of which I also am a student at.
Yeah.
And I went to try to
involving people running for public elections.
Office.
Yeah.
And I went and I tried to ask John Danenberger. I don't always like to name names with people, but he's one I will always name names with. John Danenberger. I went to try to ask him about a time where he verifiably lied to both the military as well as a German court, and that saying to both of them that he was going to be at each one, abandon his post at the military, that he a training that he was supposed to be at the military, abandoned his client at a German court, and instead was in Spain. And I wanted to ask him about it. I was like, why are you in Spain? Like, why are you hiding from talking about the situation? You've been called by federal judges that you are, I don't remember the exact words they use, but basically unprofessional. Why do you think you're fit to serve office when you've abandoned your posts on these occasions to take time off with your family? I understand taking time off with your family. I just wanted to talk to him about it. That instead, a union boss came up and stood in between me and him, and basically said that I was there to instigate, that I was a problem, and that I needed a press badge to be there. There was nowhere ever that said I needed to have a press badge. I didn't really know that. I was asked by my boss to go ask this guy a question, and I was just going to try to ask the guy a question. And so there was that. Then the NPR manager came up to me, said I needed a press badge.
What was her name again?
To be there. I don't even remember her name.
Okay.
NPR manager from WGLT. And she was like, if you do not leave right now, then she's going to have to get a cop. I said, go get the cop. The cop came up to me, and it was clear to me that I wasn't getting anywhere with this. And I was like, I guess I'll step out. I recorded at least feet of everything. I know that Illinois has weird rules when it comes to two-party recording. And so I was...
Well, you were in public, so it didn't matter.
I know. I should have.
Trust me, I know those rules very well.
I'll be honest, I was not prepared I was prepared to go in and ask a question. I wasn't prepared for a police escort. I had not, and now going through that, I would definitely change my behavior and what I had done. But
I mean, there are types of journalism, and I consider what you were trying to do there journalism.
I would consider
whether you self-identify as that or not.
I don't consider myself a journalist, but I do consider what I was doing in that instance journalistic.
Yeah. I mean, there are types of journalists that are explicitly antagonistic. in certain ways, and you could call them gotcha or
Well,
whatever. Do you think that was a possible attempt of what you were trying to do?
I was
you
trying
were willing to get like gotcha.
Not really gotcha. I was just trying to talk to him about that situation in the instance. Now I would probably go much more at gotcha because of how I was treated.
Yeah.
But in the instance, I was like, I was handed a court document by my boss, and she said, "Here is the outline of the story. Here are the court documents that show it. Ask him about it, and ask him what had actually happened. Ask him his perspective." That's really what I was trying to do. That was in the moment that I was there.
And I was there when you got kicked out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that. I don't even know if we had met by that point yet.
No, we hadn't. But like I was there, and I saw you getting kicked, and I was also there reporting as a journalist, and I had never even heard that I needed to get a press pass or whatever.
I looked into it after. I did not need a press pass.
And so I was there. I mean, I was only there because I'd already interviewed one candidate. I can't whatever his name is who won Ward 6 for Bloomington, and I was trying to get his opponent Jordan Baker. I was trying to interview him, and I showed up there, didn't even get a chance to talk to him, but I was just kind of walking around. I mean, because I'm also involved in activism, I know a lot of these people, and I'd never met Dannenberger before, but he did come up to me, and I explained, "Oh yeah, I'm a journalist for Agitation Rising," and he wanted me to interview him.
Interesting.
And nobody came up to me.
It was also important to me too because I'd watched because they had a point where they had like a public forum where Dannenberger was on the stage with other people, and he had made a point to say that one of the reasons he was running had to do with transparency. He used the word transparency, and so it meant a lot to me that he had said transparency. And then when I tried to ask him a question, getting him to be transparent about his history, that I was kicked out.
Yeah.
I don't care. Yes, he was supported much more by Democrats and people on the left than, but it's a nonpartisan race.
Yeah.
Nonpartisan.
And to be clear, I barely know this guy at all.
Yeah,
like I'm not for or against him. I couldn't care less.
But to me, it was never about that. It was like, it seems like you lied. And
I think it was
your history as a liar.
They might not have just noticed me, but I think it was hypocritical of them. I mean, this is something that I've come as a journalist more to be like, I think it was hypocritical of them to have kicked you out.
Oh, absolutely.
And if I would have made them drag me out personally.
Well, now
I'm also
again looking back, I was not prepared for any of that. I didn't know that. Like I had never been treated so poorly at an event. I've been to so many different events. I honestly think that was a worse situation for me than me at the DeSantis rally.
Like Ron DeSanctimonious.
Yeah, the DeSantis protest that I was in Peoria.
I enjoyed watching some of that.
It was a.
I almost was there, but I ended up not going at the last.
No, it was more adversarial for me to be trying to talk to this politician who claims to want transparency.
And to be clear, he won his race.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
He's currently sitting in office. He's currently sitting in his office.
Council.
I've talked to James O'Keefe about that situation a few times. Which is very interesting.
So, I mean, do you believe that if you go to an event and you request a press pass, if you're not a reporter, should you be given a press pass?
I don't. If it's a public event, you shouldn't need a press pass. Anybody is. That's what I talked about.
I also agree with that.
Because I've done so much. I did so much research on press passes and everything like that. And so that's why when I was at that event, the DeSantis one, and I had people that were like, "You need to have a press pass on you." I'm like, "No, I don't."
Yeah.
And it was almost whenever I would say that,
and people
don't realize it, but that was whenever I would say that, it was like a direct callback to when I was told I needed one at the public event. That's like what was going through my head with.
And of everything that I saw, because again, I used to live in Peoria. I was born and raised in Peoria. I knew most of the people that you ended up engaging with. That was the only thing that really bothered me, is when they asked for a press pass. Yeah. Because I've had the same thing happen to me. And to me, it's like, well, if they can do it to my side, and they're more likely to do it to like actual leftists, not just like these Biden fondling like liberals or whatever, but like actual leftists. They're more likely to do it to us than to conservatives. But I still think like that question in and of itself, and this is just some random lady that was on the street, right? She doesn't have any specific authority.
The Peoria Pride president, who was like one of the organizers, also asked me for a press pass.
Yeah. So, so like I don't like press pass. I can tell you my own experience, because like obviously the majority of my journalism and my activism, because I consider my journalism, my activism very closely related. I'm very clear that I wear my politics on my sleeve. Like I don't pretend that I don't, but I also only want to report factual information. And so at our courthouse, in the McLean County Courthouse, you cannot get in there with electronics. It's one of the few courthouses I've ever been to where you cannot bring electronics into the courthouse
as press,
unless you have a specific press pass. Most courthouses you can bring electronics in regardless.
Really?
Yeah, you don't have to be.
Every courthouse I have ever been to they say leave your phone in your car. You're not allowed to have it in
then
there.
we've been to very different, like Peoria. You can bring an electronics.
Like, I'm talking like I've been.
Now there's a difference between the courtroom and the full courthouse. And so in Peoria, it's you can't bring it into the courtroom, but the courthouse itself.
I've never been to a court where I haven't wanted or I haven't been there.
Yeah,
just going to a
and so I wanted to get a.
Not that I'm like always on trial or anything, but I have gone on. I went to field trips to like the federal court in Chicago.
Yeah.
I had a speeding ticket one time, like things like that. So.
Yeah, and so because I focus so heavily on policing, but also incarceration, the criminal justice. I mean, that's really like one of my main reporting areas. I wanted to get a press pass so I could actually get in the damn building with my electronics.
Yeah.
And I had to go through Ryan Denham of WGLT. He's the media liaison.
I've seen that guy
for the judicial district. And I've reached out to him twice and said, look, I'm a journalist. You know who I am.
Yeah.
You've seen my stuff. And I explained, hey, I'm doing this. These are things that I want to do. And he basically says, well, I don't consider you legitimate enough to. He'll like, bring a pen and paper, but we're worried that you might not get something accurate. And I'm like,
wouldn't I have a better chance of getting something accurate?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said to him. And so here you have a basically competition of journalists that's being able to block his own competition from being able to come in and report accurately. And the most recent time I did, I'm like, look, I have a disability. Like I need to be able to bring a recording device. Sometimes it's hard for me to keep track of my thoughts and stuff or be able to record things down. He's just like, I don't care. So, which is a violation of the American with Disabilities Act.
Yeah.
I mean, and so this is a problem. I mean, I know that there's been what are they, the watchdog group? What are they called?
I don't remember exactly, but those are the same people. They FOIA'd for the police body cam footage of mine, and there was no body cam.
They actually had to sue and go over Ryan Denham's head,
really,
in order to actually get a press pass. And I know that here, one of the reporters here at Insurrection Radio is Kevin Woodard. He was given like a press pass to go in. Now, to be clear, Ryan Denham also wrote a whole article explaining why Cities 92.9 spreads misinformation and stuff like that. Now, as far as I know, everything in that article is correct, and we can disagree on that.
I don't think I was ever mentioned in it. So
you weren't, but
which always makes me mad.
But no,
WAPO did a story on us too, and I even did an interview for them. I was never once mentioned, and I was like, "Come on!" If did
you record your interview?
No, I didn't.
I always record your interview.
I should have.
But that's the thing. He writes a whole article saying that Insurrection Radio gets misinformation wrong all the time, which I don't disagree with him on. And then he gives one of their reporters a press pass to get into the courthouse, and then he has the audacity to come and say, "Well, we're worried that you might not."
That was definitely personal. That was definitely personal.
It might have been.
Because the thing is that of all of the people that I know that do reporting here, Kevin Woodard, I don't want to say Kevin Woodard is very
Woody.
Yeah. Minus a time or two, has never been that instigatory.
I mean, the only rules that should matter, like I think Diane Benjamin, if anyone's not familiar with Diane Benjamin, look at bln.com.
blnnews.com.
Yeah, blnnews.com. I think as long as you can follow the rules, because there are rules that you have to follow. If you bring your press stuff, that should be the only question. You should be able to go to Ryan Denham and be able to get a press pass to go in the courtroom if you want to follow a trial. I mean, it's absolutely absurd that we're letting legacy media be able to determine who gets access to this or not. Yeah, I mean, even that. And this is not the only courthouse where they have basically an NPR affiliate as their liaison to do it. And so, I mean, and again, I could file a lawsuit, which the Edgar County Watchdogs, that's who I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, that's true.
They actually did. They went above his head to the judge and they got their press pass.
Yeah, those are the same people that tried to get the police body cam footage of mine, for which there was no police body cam.
Was he wearing a body cam?
I don't remember, honestly. And I don't think I got that much of him.
Because based on the Safety Act, he's supposed to be wearing a body cam.
When did the Safety Act go into effect again?
For him, it probably would have been, because it had different depending on the size of your department. They might have had to wait till 2024.
Yeah,
or 2020.
so it might not be.
But I would think ISU,
because this was like March, April.
Yeah, but I would
year.
think ISU would be ahead of the curve on a lot of these things. They got those social support animals. They can at least get some body cameras, which I don't have a problem with.
We got Sage.
I don't have a problem with social support animals. I love animals. So, I mean, you know,
do you believe?
I mean, well, let me ask you this: do you think that if there are situations, because there are situations where you need to go through a specific channel, and do you believe that you should be able to contact McLean County Courthouse or the judicial district and say, I'd like a press pass, and that they should give it to you? Okay, well, I agree with it. Why?
If you can,
because you're a reporter.
Well, no, not because I'm a reporter. I think because of the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Period. Because I have a
First Amendment protects reporters.
But there's also a difference between a reporter and a journalist.
Is there?
I believe, yeah.
Okay.
Because a reporter,
there's a lot of these very loose concepts here. These are all really messy, man. Are you
a reporter? And again, it wouldn't also just be reporting from you. It'd still be opinion, because I would go there, collect the evidence that I would need, and then I would come back and give my opinion on it. I'm an opinion host. I wouldn't necessarily be a reporter. I wouldn't necessarily be a journalist.
Are you saying words and concepts are context dependent?
Some.
I would say all of them.
No, not all words are context.
So,
well, I mean,
they will.
Kind of, because
most linguists would disagree with you.
Well, no, now I'm thinking more now, because there's obviously intent behind words of what you're saying. So yes, they do change contextually, but don't try to do some leftist voodoo magic over there on me or something. Like, no, but I want to end off on just one thing, as we're kind of coming to definitely past time here. Is there an opinion that you hold that you would consider to be relatively conservative, or like more traditionally conservative of an opinion?
I'm sure I do. I mean, I think ultimately, and you might not like it, I think that's a subjective. There's a subjective answer to that.
I hate you.
You hate me?
No, I don't hate you.
But no, it's like, I am very distrustful of the government, and people act as if that's a conservative viewpoint. I'm like, look at what the government. I mean, the FBI was set up to go after socialists and anarchists.
That's general populism, and then you get into populist conservatism, populist.
But I mean,
socialism.
I guess that's as we go on to the next section, that's the question that I wanted to ask. What does populism mean to you? Because I've heard about conservative populists. I've only actually, of all the people that I've followed, I think Sagar and Jetty, who has Breaking Points, and I highly recommend that everybody watch Breaking Points. He's the only conservative populist that I've actually met where, like, I actually understand what makes him a populist. So, like, what makes you a populist? Because I consider myself a populist.
General ideas of populism. I mean, general distrust of government, politicians, as well as a belief in, and this is where it gets funny, because it's like, it comes into kind of Marxist ideology, but the idea of an elite versus the general public.
Are you saying you're secretly a Marxist?
Oh, that's exactly what I'm saying. No, I'm not a commie. But
not all Marxists are anyway, this is that we'd get lost in that discussion.
But yeah, so a general idea, a distrust of government, a belief in an elite that is adversarial to the general population, and distrust of politicians and the overall system.
See, that's a completely different definition of populism than what I have. I'm not saying that yours isn't valid, but like, to me, it has a lot more. What?
I can Google it. You can keep going.
I mean, to me, it has a lot more to do with who should be in control of society and, like, workers' rights. To me, that is like what because I mean, yes, I am against elites and stuff too, and I believe the elites are oppressing the working class, which you and I are both members of the working class. And so, to me, that's my populism has a lot more to do with workers' rights.
Well, and I think that's where you get into your sector of populism. Because so if I Google it, a political approach that strives to appeal to ordinary people who feel that their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups.
Okay, so that's a pretty broad.
Well, exactly.
Definition.
That's why I say, like, that when you say that your conservative opinion is the distrust of government, that has become more of a Republican conservative, like, mainstream. But that was also, I mean, if you go 20 years ago, that was like traditional of a lot of the Democrats.
I mean, but most Republicans are super, well, there's this very small group that are, like, against the FBI, but they're for a lot of the security state that exists.
I'm very against the FBI. I'm against most three-letter agencies, the majority of bureaucracy.
Okay, well, that's probably, you probably should be.
Because again, that's the populist, that's more of a populist approach. And so when you say that yours is more about workers' rights and everything, that's when you get into your, like, a socialist populist.
I mean,
point of view. As I am a conservative populist, I don't necessarily believe that it needs to do with that there's a need for unions and everything.
You don't think there's a need for unions at all?
Well, I think in a perfect world, unions could serve a benefit, but I think that in our flawed world, unions in practice tend to lead to its own sense of the mob, in which we've created, an elite through our unions. Like, if you look at the people who are in charge of unions and the people on the administrative side of it, they are in and of themselves their own elite that work against the average. They're working class.
Yeah, I mean that's
and they'll keep them tame with good enough benefits.
By the way, that's a leftist critique right there. There's a lot of leftists that would make that exact same critique. I mean,
because it's populist, because it is a popular, and so like I understand, but I understand that that's where you can find common ground on it. Oftentimes our solutions are much different, and that's where you get into the sectors of whether or not you're conservative, socialist, Democrat.
I mean, what are your positions on protecting workers?
I think that there should be general guidelines. I think every worker should have the opportunity to advocate for themselves. I don't think that unions should be the end all be all for.
Do you think unions should exist?
I think they can, but I don't think that they should in any way be forced. I don't think that a public school teacher should be forced to join a union. I think that they should be able to negotiate for their own salary and their own benefits if they would like to. There should be no forced reason that anybody pays into a union. If there is going to be like union administration, obviously an elected union rep, and that should be the person you directly talk to them about anything that goes on within the union. And then you can have other officers of members that are workers within the union itself that also take on the job within the union. It should not be, if you are not currently working the job for which you are a union member, that you are a union rep for, that you are a union treasurer or anything like that, then you should not be representing them.
Did you vote for the union bill, the amendment to the Constitution?
I voted against it.
You voted against it?
Yeah, against it. Well, because again, in practice, I believe that unions are oftentimes heavily corrupt.
Okay. Do you support like higher minimum wages?
No, because I believe you should be able to advocate for yourself. If we get into a marketplace in which there are 10 people applying for one job and only one person is going to be able to get it, you should be able to say, hey, I'm willing to work for $5 an hour. I'm willing to work for that. If I am willing to work for that much, I should be able to advocate for that, if that's the marketplace that we're in.
Okay.
So when it comes to the minimum wage, not to mention the fact that at a federal level, if we are going to have minimum wages, which I'm not 100% against, but we should have no minimum wage at the federal level.
Oh, I mean, I think we should raise the federal minimum wage personally.
Well, my belief in that stems from the idea that we have a war, or we have a country in which the economic biomes that we have are vastly different. $15 in Bloomington Normal is going to go much further than $15 in Chicago.
And that's why Chicago has its own higher minimum wage.
And I would argue that's a chicken and the egg argument when it comes to why costs are so high. And the egg argument? Well, no, not from you. I'm saying what's going on in my head is chicken and the egg of whether or not minimum wage is in part due to the rising costs in Chicago, or if the rising costs are causing them to need a higher minimum wage. And it's economically speaking, it's not 100% certain as to which came first. But again, a locality determining its minimum wage, for multiple reasons, I am much more in favor of. I'm not against a minimum wage at a very local level, but I don't think there should be a state minimum wage. I don't think there should be a federal minimum wage. I think there could be laws that say your locality needs to have a minimum wage, but that should be determined by the locality. If we want to talk about a democratic solution, then your locality, the people that live there, should determine what that minimum wage is. But I also think that even if there is a minimum wage, there should be an asterisk on all of it that says if somebody's willing to work for less, they can.
Okay.
And at the local level, have our local levels determine their minimum wages.
Okay.
Why should the federal government be the one? If you're distrustful of government, then why do you put so much trust in the federal government?
I am not distrustful of all government. There are certain programs that I like. There's also programs that I don't. I mean, I'm not an absolutist in that area. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I assume you like the military.
Kind of.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so right there's certain,
like the military,
again, there's certain parts of the government that you like.
But
it's
I don't
not an
like
absolute.
The people that lead the military. I like the soldiers themselves usually.
Yeah, but again, like there's certain parts of it you like. There's certain parts of it you don't. So
there's certain parts that I
I mean, I don't
that I dislike less than others.
Yeah.
That's
All
the
right.
way
However you self-identify, you're valid. I'll support you.
But but why should it stem from the federal level for a minimum wage for almost anything? Why should intricate policies stem from the federal level? Because to me, as a populist, you would want things at the local level. Because then at the local level, you have much more control over.
Yeah, but not everything can be handled sufficiently at the local level. I mean, that's why we create large governments, is because large things can typically handle more problems than small
why
things.
I believe the military is something that needs to be handled at the federal level. That's why I would put the military at much more.
We live in a globalist economy. We live in a global economy.
But why should the domestic minimum wage be set at the federal level?
Yeah, so it reduces the chances of like one person in Kentucky getting taken advantage of over a person in Illinois. Like I think that there's currently no state in the country where you can survive on a single minimum wage job, and to me that's a problem. And so everywhere in the country it's a problem. So I think we should increase the federal minimum wage, which we did pretty consistently since FDR. It was largely successful until we got to the George W. Bush Obama years, and then we haven't had a federal minimum wage increase since, and we've seen the greatest wealth disparity since hitherto time began. And I believe that that's a problem, and I believe that at least some of that would be alleviated by raising the federal minimum wage. So,
but again, from the federal, why the federal level though? But what about somebody, because they're somebody that is living in,
because McDonald's is an international brand. They have as a corporation, they have way more powerful than you or I. Yum Brands is an international brand.
Because my question more so was also tying to which I hadn't gotten to, but was the idea of a significant portion of the people that are working at minimum wage. They might be working. There are people that are working minimum wage jobs, but they are not working at minimum wage because they've either worked there for a while because of what their experience prior to. They're working higher than the minimum wage. What about your teenager? Because that's the majority of people that are working at minimum wage are people around the ages of 16 to 22. The majority of people that are working at minimum wage, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
That's not true.
Yeah, it is.
So who's working all those minimum wage jobs while those teenagers are at school?
You have people that are 18 to 22 as well. I said 16 to 22 around that.
I mean, I don't believe that statistic is correct.
The people that are working at minimum wage, not at minimum wage. So so even to answer that question differently as well, is that you have people that are working jobs that typically pay minimum wage, but are not at minimum wage for whatever reason. They're not working at minimum wage.
I believe if
the majority of people that are working and earning the minimum wage are not the people that are trying to live off their salary. It's usually 16 to 22 year olds.
I believe everybody should make enough money to live on. It doesn't matter whether you're 16 or 17, because if you pay a 16 or 17-year-old a lower wage, that undercuts the older workers. And so I believe everybody should be able to make enough money to live on. So
somebody who has been working that minimum wage job for 5, 10, 15, 20 years and has earned more and more and more as time has gone on should get paid the same as somebody.
That's not what I said.
That's why I'm
the minimum threshold should be that you should be able to live. If you work 40 hours a week, I believe the minimum threshold should be a living wage. It's not to say if you've worked there for a while and you have more experience and stuff like that you shouldn't be paid more. That's what the minimum wage is about. The minimum at which you're allowed to pay somebody.
What if somebody wants to work for less or is willing to work for less?
No.
You don't think that they should be able to negotiate for themselves?
No.
Interesting. If somebody wants to work for less, you think the government should prohibit them from?
I think that would undermine
from the private business.
I think that would undermine other workers, and I think that would end up being defeatist in the long run. So
interesting.
But that's my populism.
Interesting. Well, to answer my own question that I started the ending with was because I asked you if you had any conservative opinions. More liberal opinion that I have. And while I got into some of the populism and everything, which can be misconstrued as being even
Marxist almost.
almost. But
I'm gonna make a shirt about this.
I'm actually very anti-death penalty.
Okay.
I'm very anti-death penalty.
I used to be pro-death penalty, and then
I used to be very pro.
and then I became anti-death penalty.
What's your reasoning?
Well, one, I don't think the state should be able to have the power to kill its own citizens. I think
very much part of why I'm as well.
Also don't think it's effective. Like the type of people that murder people, it's typically they're either an organized crime, they're sociopaths, or they're crime of passion. So like the rationale that is not going to be factored into them committing that crime. It's more expensive, not just from the fact that you have to have so many appeals, which I don't want there to be less appeals. I want there to be as much judicial process as possible. But also when you put somebody in a death row, like it costs more to keep people in death row. It's higher security. It's just overall, I don't believe it's effective. And that's why those are all the reasons that I am.
No, I'm in agreement with all that. On top of, there have been several instances in which innocent people have been executed. And I think that the way I see it is, so like, just for the sake of simple numbers, if we had 100 people that were on death row and 99 of them were 100% guilty, one of them was innocent, but it wasn't until 10 years later that you'd find it out. I would rather have 99 people that are guilty sit in a jail cell for the rest of their life, and that one person at least sit in that jail cell for 10 more years until he's found innocent and then be released, than for that person to be killed.
And then he should be given reparations if he's innocent.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. He absolutely should be given reparations.
There's another thing. You support some kinds of reparations.
Piss off.
Some kinds. I said some kinds. I didn't say all
on
kinds.
A very individual basis. But so that's, and so I would much rather have all the guilty people rot in a jail cell and the one innocent person get to live. But we are coming above 2 hours here now, later than I know you even expected. Zac, any final thoughts?
No, no.
Check out some stuff on Zac's channel. It will be in the description of my video. If you're watching on Zac's channel, definitely check out some of my stuff if you want a differing opinion. I loved having this conversation, Zac. Let's definitely do something like this again as new things come up. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. And if you like this, don't forget to like this video on either channel, subscribe to all of our channels, share it with your friends, and comment what you think on.
Stalk us on Instagram, all the things.
Stalk all of us, everything like that. Yeah. God bless you guys. God bless America, even if you don't believe in him.
Praise Buddha.
And thank you for watching Zac's Strange Corners of Speechless.